Good morning, everyone. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to those who are joining us again on day two, and welcome to those of you who are participating in your first day of this 2 day event. We have another day that's very packed with lots of wonderful information and individuals that will be presenting to us. We are going to continue to build on yesterday's theme of engaging and supporting the whole person while supporting mission readiness through activities such as succession planning, leadership development, and diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility initiatives. For those of you joining today, again, the summit was created to help all of us to explore the realm of the possible in talent management. So I'm very excited again for another great day. And I would like to again express my gratitude to yesterday's speakers, Joe Pereira from NASA, Charles and Marissa from Better Up, and Pamela from Department of Health and Human Services, Administration for Children and Families. First up for today is Jennifer Breeden with OPM. Jennifer serves as an HR consultant for the Workforce Planning and Reshaping team in OPM's HR strategy and evaluation solutions. Jennifer came to OPM from the private sector in 2010. Jennifer has worked on a variety of projects, including workforce planning, succession planning, and organizational design. She received a Bachelor of Arts in Marketing and Management and an MBA from Columbia College. Outside of work, Jennifer enjoys traveling, walking her pet turtle Fergie, and working towards becoming a pastry chef slash master baker. So now that you all know more about Jennifer, I would turn it over to her. So Jennifer, thank you again, and the floor is yours.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here with all of you today. I swear I meant to send an updated picture. That obviously doesn't look like me anymore, but I am the same person, I promise. So today I am going to talk about succession planning with a little bit of knowledge management mixed in there as well, because I think it's just as important to talk about knowledge management when we're talking about succession planning as well. And a lot of times when I do this training, people think it's so much different than in the private sector, and that is absolutely true. But I'm hoping by the end of this that you'll know that there are still ways that we can do succession planning successfully in the government as well. So let's go ahead and get started. So I think I'm just supposed to say next slide, perfect. So we're going to talk about succession planning today. So next slide. This is what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to just tell you a very brief little bit about who I am, who my group is. We'll talk about succession planning, some of the benefits, roles, and then we're going to talk about the 9-box, which is one of our main tools that we use. We also call it the talent grid as well. I feel like there's probably 2 more names that we have, but when you see it, you'll probably know what it is. And then we'll go through our succession planning model that we use as well. Next slide. So the reason that I want to give a little bit of an overview of who we are is I work for OPM, but a lot of times people only think of OPM as someone who comes in and maybe tells you that you need to change something, or we need to review something, or maybe you're in trouble. But we are a little bit different, the group that I actually work in. We're a reimbursable component of OPM, so we actually work with agencies to help make them better. So we go into contracts with agencies and we partner with them and we work side by side with them for a fee to help make their organizations better. So I work with CDC, USDA, all kinds of different agencies. And so I just want to put that out there because, you know, if there's anything that you see here today that you want to help with, we obviously can work with you as well. So we're just a little bit different part of OPM that a lot of people don't know about. Next slide. So what is succession planning, right? Sometimes people think it's a buzzword. There's lots of different ways that you can kind of explain it. But it's basically, succession planning is a way of thinking of how do we take what we have now to make sure that we're successful in the future, right? We want to make sure that we have a large pool of people who are ready to step into whatever role it is that we need in the future. A lot of times people think about succession planning only for leadership positions, which is a big part of it, but we can also think of it in terms of what are some mission critical occupations that maybe we're worried about losing, right? You can think of this as, are there single points of failure? And that could even be, you know, an admin position or a scientific position or something like that, that if those people leave, we're in a lot of trouble, right? But it can also be, say, we know that, the technology is changing. There's a lot of those chat things coming in, right? And we know that we're not set up for that. That could also be succession planning, right? Where we're thinking about, okay, we know that we need a lot of technology positions in the future. So how can we set ourselves up for that? So I don't want you to think of it just as leadership, even though that's a big part of it. It can be a large range of positions that we're kind of planning for. Next slide. Another thing that I like to kind of focus on is sometimes people think about succession planning as the same as workforce planning. They should go hand to hand, but in an ideal world, sometimes we don't have enough time to do them all together. So I like to spend just a minute to think about the differences between them, right? So when we think about workforce planning, that is when we're looking at the broad workforce, right? We're thinking of, what's the technology that we need? Do we need different space? Do we need different computers? Do we need different trainings? Do we need to change our budget, right? We're looking at like a really large, we're looking at the workforce as a whole. Whereas succession planning, we're really just focusing on talent pools for either leadership position or those expert roles or those single points of failure, right? So it's like a big picture versus maybe just like the leadership or those key expert roles. Same thing when we're thinking about succession planning, we're really focusing on those individual positions. When we're thinking about workforce planning, again, it's all the positions, right? What's going to benefit the most of our positions? So while it's best if we do these together, obviously, sometimes organizations need to really think about workforce planning first, what's best for everyone before we can get into succession planning. Whereas a big trend right now in government is that most people are focusing on succession planning because there's a lot of people retiring, and maybe they focus on workforce planning separately. Next slide. So this is a really important slide. It's probably one of the most important slides in the whole training that I'm going to spend just a couple minutes on. It's important to know what succession planning is, but it's equally as important to know what it is not. And this is where it gets really sticky, where people think that we can't do succession planning in the government. Because a lot of times, and in the past, we have been really well known for doing things like replacement planning and pre-selection. And when we do succession planning right, we are not doing that, okay? So what is pre-selection? So pre-selection is if I'm a leader and I know that I am leaving in a year and I start kind of grooming someone to come in behind me, right? I already know that I'm going to put them in there. That is pre-selection, right? And that is something that we are not allowed to do. We're not supposed to do in the government. Absolute or static is something that it is not as well. So, and I'll get to how we get around these in just a second. If I am leaving in a year and I know that, and I pick this one person, what if that one person decides that they are going to leave, right? And they found another position that they make a whole bunch of more money at. Well, now I'm in trouble, right? Because I had spent all my time on that one person. So it's not absolute and it's not static, because I need to be constantly thinking about creating that pool of people. You're going to hear me say that way too much, a pool of people. I need to constantly be creating that pool of people because it's not a one and done. We need to always be thinking about how to create that pool of either the experts that we need or the leaders that we need. Replacement planning, I'm going to get back to equal treatment in just a second. Replacement planning is something very similar to pre-selection. It's when you're very much just grooming that one person and you're not looking outside of it at all. And so you just constantly are kind of grooming that person or maybe two people to know that they're going to move up into that. But this one is a little bit sticky, the equal treatment one. So say, for example, I am getting ready to retire in a year, and I have 8 individuals underneath of me. And I try to give them as much information as I can, right? I start bringing them into my leadership calls. I start training them on how to kind of make client calls. I teach them how to write statements of work, right? I'm trying to teach everyone as much as I can because I'm getting ready to leave. And I'm not sure how long the hiring process is going to take, right, for my replacement. So say that there's like a leadership training that I know that's coming that's going to cost a little bit of money and that I know that people are going to have to travel for. If I've asked my 8 folks and I know that only 4 of them actually want to be a leader, they have expressed that they actually want to be a leader either now or in the near future, I am only going to send those 4 people that have expressed their interest. Those other 4 people, they've told me, I don't ever want to be a leader. I don't ever want to be a manager. I'm going to retire in the next couple of years. I'm not going to send them to that training that costs money and time if I know that they have no leadership interest at all. I'm still going to train them on as much as possible, right? Because it's good for them and it's good for whoever the next manager is going to be. But I'm only going to send those 4 people that have actually expressed interest. So that's what I mean by equal treatment. I'm going to provide the training and the interest and invite them to meetings as much as possible. But for those that have expressed interest in leadership positions or the expert positions or whatever it is that we're focusing on, those are the only ones that I'm going to send to those kind of things that are like time intensive or money, they include money. So how do we get around all of these things? That's why you've heard me say pool of people over and over and over again. When we do succession planning correctly, we are trying to give opportunities to as many people as possible. So that's why you heard me say I'm inviting everyone to meetings, or I'm trying to give trainings to everyone about writing statements of work, or whatever it is that makes that position important, because I want as many people as possible to get the opportunity to kind of either gain more competencies, get more training, or kind of grow into leadership roles as possible. So instead of just grooming one person, I'm trying to groom as many as possible so that we have that really large group or pool of people who are ready to move up into those next roles. So if we try to offer it to as many people as possible, we get around a lot of these things, except the equal treatment one, which is, again, like I said, you kind of have to think about those things that are really time intensive or really they include some money. Those ones you really only offer to those who have actual interest in the position or the leadership position. So I talked way too long for that slide, but that one's usually a sticky one. So I wanted to make sure that that was really clear. Perfect, thank you. So how do we avoid pre-selection? So I kind of said all of these things earlier, just a second ago. But just to reiterate, we want to make sure that we focus on a broad pool of candidates, right? We're not just focusing on one. We try to improve as many people as possible on their leadership skills and their competencies that they need. And we also provide a wide and open access, right? So if there's free trainings, if I was a manager and I had folks underneath of me, I would let them, come to this training today, right? Or this session today. So just trying to invite people as much as possible so they can kind of seek those developmental things. And the last one is that we never, ever, ever guaranteed a promotion or a pay raise or any kind of benefit. If people know that we're doing a succession planning program, nothing is ever promised, right? It's not if you take this 2-week course, you're going to get this. That's not how it works. Nothing is ever guaranteed. You're just doing it for development purposes, or you're just trying to get more knowledge for your own kind of career growth. Next slide. So there's lots of benefits for succession planning, right? We hear them all the time, and these are kind of some of the main ones. When we do succession planning, when we're constantly trying to build people up to kind of improve them for their competencies, for their leadership skills, getting expertise that they need, we are prepared for planned and unplanned attrition, right? So sometimes we have people like my former boss who knew down to the minute, like he had 6 months, 2 weeks, 4 hours until he was getting ready to retire, right? Some people know exactly when they're getting ready to leave, or when a new position is coming on and they're getting ready to leave for that. But sometimes you don't know until way too late, that somebody is actually going to leave. And so if you always have a pool of people ready, you can also plan for those unplanned attritions, right? Things that you don't really know about. Another one is that if you always have a pool of people ready, you're going to have the right people available, right, to meet those objectives. Say, you did some strategic planning and you know that a new technology is coming down the pipe in the next 5 to 6 years, and you've been starting to train people up on this new technology. When it comes, when the mission changes, you already have those people kind of ready, right? And the last one is that less time and expense are spent on sourcing talent. So instead of hiring a whole bunch of contractors or spending a lot of time kind of trying to train up a whole bunch of people, this way you always have people kind of ready to go. And also there's less time. We all know that hiring takes longer than it should sometimes, usually always. And so this way, if we already have some people ready who can apply and who would probably already fill all of the things that are needed, we can spend less time and expense kind of getting that talent. Next slide, thank you. So I know that I say all of these wonderful things, but we also know that there are lots of barriers to succession planning, right? If it was so easy, we would all be doing it all the time, right? But sometimes there are barriers. And so one of the big ones that I see a lot is that when we think that when we are doing succession planning, we think that we always have to kind of rely on just HR, right? So succession planning should not just be the responsibility of the human resources department, right? Human capital, whatever your agency calls it. It is a shared responsibility with everyone, right? With our senior leaders, with our managers, with our employees. We have to hold people accountable for their roles in the process, and it should not just rely on HR. Should they be part of the process? Of course, but it shouldn't just be on their shoulders. So I'm working with USDA right now, and we are doing succession planning for them. And we have tried to do this in the past, and they relied only on HR, and it did not go very well. The second round, we're doing individual interviews with each one of the managers, and we're really just validating some of the information from HR, but it's coming from the actual managers, and it's going so much better because they're taking the role, they're being held accountable. This is part of their, performance plan. They actually have to do this and be a part of it and then share it with their employees. And it's going so much better. So succession planning is only successful if everybody is kind of involved in it and everyone really understands their roles. Which leads into the next one, misunderstanding the effort can also be a barrier. So if we say we're doing succession planning, right, and it's happy and we're all so excited about it, but then halfway through you're like, but wait, what does that mean? Like, are we just doing it for senior leaders? Are we doing it for every level? Are we using some kind of tool? Does this mean we're going to get trained on it? Like, if we're not really clear on it, or it's too overly ambitious, like we say we're going to interview every single person, but that's not really possible, we're not gonna go very well. And this one's not just for succession planning. This is obviously for kind of any effort that we do. But for succession planning, we want to be very clear. This first round, we're just training you on succession planning. The next round, we're going to interview people. Then we know that they're going to have to fill out a tool. We want to be very clear with what we're kind of setting out, and we want to be very clear on what the end goal is. What are we trying to get? Next slide. Another thing that we have to think about that is a barrier for succession planning is not devoting enough time and effort. So these two kind of go hand in hand. Sometimes people think that succession planning can be done really fast. We fill out one little exercise and then it's all going to be fixed. And everybody knows that that's not really how it works. So we have to make sure that we say, okay, as a manager, I'm going to need 4 hours of your time over the next 2 months to fill out and to have an interview with me, fill out a tool, have a second interview with me, and then review the report that I write up for you, right? And then from there, you should probably spend at least an hour a week or a month thinking about how you're going to train up your folks, or think about creating a knowledge management plan or something like that. So we want to be really clear that this is for everyone, but then also that they have to devote enough time for it. So again, I'm going to go back to USDA just because they're the one that I'm working with right now that I can think of. They're actually putting this again into their performance plans, saying that you have to devote, I think it's an hour a month or something, to creating knowledge management plans, and you have to keep updating your succession plan because they want to be held accountable for it, and they want to make sure that they're devoting enough time for it. So this kind of gets around the resource problem, and it also gets around the quick fix attitude. Obviously, there's solutions, lots of different solutions. I'm just giving you one that I can think of off the top of my head. But these are both other barriers to succession planning. Another one is difficulty forecasting. So we can use data when we do succession planning, right? We can pull retirement numbers. We can pull how many people are under each manager. We can do all of those kinds of things. But if we don't have great numbers, obviously that's going to lead to inaccurate predictions. But I don't want you to think that you have to pull workforce analytics to do succession planning. I've had many clients that don't really have access to data, or don't know how to work it, or just don't have the resources, and we still do just fine. We still can work around this. But my point is that if we have bad data that comes in, we're obviously going to have bad data that goes out. So if we are pulling numbers, we want to double check them. I can't tell you how many interviews I've been in, and I'm like, okay, so the data says that you have 32 people under you, and they're like, what? No, that's like 10 years old. I have like 62. So just make sure that whatever data that you pull in, you're obviously double checking it so that we can get accurate predictions when we kind of pull things out on the other side. Also, organization politics can be a barrier as well. So when you do succession planning, you want to make sure that you have all of the support, the right people at the table, and you want to make sure that all of the employees kind of understand why they're there, because you want to make sure that you understand what really motivates employees, right, for being a part of succession planning. So sometimes when we go into organizations and do succession planning, there's a lot of baggage that comes with maybe poor succession planning practices in the past. So to understand the organizational politics is really important. So for a client that I just worked with, I'm not going to name this one, they had some pretty poor succession planning practices in the past. And so when we came in, I told them, okay, we have to not do succession planning for a good year, because we need to really work on building trust again, so that employees actually think, okay, when they say succession planning, they actually mean that they're going to help me develop, and they're not just going to pick a person and do replacement planning and all of the things that were done in the past. So we had to do a lot of trust building and education before we could actually do succession planning. So we really need to understand like what's going on in the organization. And then we can think about, okay, how can we use retention tools and promotions and provide opportunities in a way that's really going to help employees instead of like hurt them and set them back. Next slide. Perfect, thank you. So this is the OPM succession planning model, and I'm sure that all of you have seen many different kinds of models. I'm not saying that OPM's is the best. I obviously have to use it because I work there. But there's lots of models that kind of follow the same pattern. I worked with CDC, and they we created together a model that actually has 6 steps. They just kind of broke up one of the steps into 2. So it doesn't have to be 5, it can be whatever, but they all kind of follow this same model. And the important part of this to kind of remember is that it's a circle. It keeps going forever. So again, it's not static. You don't do this just once, you continue to do it all the time. In the next couple of slides, we'll actually go through what each of these steps really mean when we do succession planning in the government. Next slide. Okay, so the first phase is where we establish strategic alignment. And this is something that we do in workforce planning and like all parts of really human resources. And what does this really mean? So basically it means we have to think of why are we doing succession planning, right? Like what is the main driver of doing succession planning? And a lot of times people will say, well, because a lot of people are retiring. Well, okay, great. But I have been here for 12 years. And since I started, everyone's been saying there's a huge retirement wave, and it's always the big thing. So yes, while that is a piece of data that we want to bring in, we also have to think of what is the big picture of why you're doing succession planning, right? Not just because everyone's retiring, but are we thinking that 75% of all of our leaders are going to retire in the next 2 years? Okay, that makes me understand a little bit more, right? Or again, we'll go back to the technology. We know that a new technology is coming in the next 3 years and we're not ready for it. And our mission is getting ready to change. Well, then obviously we have a problem. We need to survey the workforce and see, does anyone know how to use this? Are there trainings available for it? Do we really need to start creating a pool of people who are ready for that? So we kind of have to build in all of this foundational information, right? If we think about a house, you know, we have to kind of build that foundation of why we're doing all of the work on top of it. So we have to look at our mission, look at our documents, you know, look at our analysis, workforce data, EVS results. Do we need to do a SWOT analysis or scenario planning or environmental scanning? So we can kind of figure out what are we really focused on? Because just doing succession planning is way too big, right? Are we doing it just for our leaders, just for our admin positions? You know, what are we doing it for? So we kind of have to bring in that big goal of doing succession planning and focus it a little bit more. Next slide. So when we say strategic alignment, in case you're unaware of that, it's basically just where we look at all of the mission and goals and objectives, and we think about, you know, what is our main goal. So we also try to bring in many senior leaders, managers, and employees, because we want to make sure that we see what's happening at every level. So if you have enough time, this might be a time where you do some focus groups to ask, you know, like, what are the positions that you're most worried about? Or what do you see coming up in the future, right? What are our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? Depending on the amount of time that you have, you can spend more or less time here. Sometimes you just get a directive from up above that means you have to do something, but strategic alignment is kind of laying out that base of where we want to go. Next slide. So again, this is what I'm trying to say. We kind of have to figure out where we are now, right? See, we have 22 leaders and 18 of them are getting ready to retire. So we know that as is, we're doing great, but in the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to be in a little bit of trouble if we don't create better succession planning tools, right? So where is our agency going? You know, how do we kind of have to figure out what our goals are and where do we want to be in the next 3 to 5 years? Next slide. Another thing that we want to think about is when we're doing strategic alignment around succession planning is a big part of it is kind of figuring out how we can use the same resources and eliminate waste. So for a client I'm working with now, a big part of their succession planning was that they needed a lot of technology training. That's something that their agency was really struggling with, and they knew that something, you know, they're behind the curve of technology. And so that was kind of what their succession planning was focused on, was like technology. And as we got into it and started doing interviews, there was so much training and things that other parts of the agency were doing that a lot of groups didn't know about. So another part of kind of figuring out our strategic alignment is figuring out the resources that we already have internally, so we can kind of stop wasting our efforts and really kind of understand what our action plan is for moving forward. Next slide. You can also do a SWOT analysis for this strategic alignment piece. If you've never heard of this before, it's where you look at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats for your organization. If you've never done a SWOT before, I can provide you with some information. We do it in like a focus group session. And I have all kind of templates and tools if you've never done that before, but it's a way of kind of looking at what do we have that we can use to kind of mitigate those weaknesses or threats that we have coming down in the next 3 to 5 years. I keep saying 3 to 5 years. You can do strategic alignment for 1 to 2, 5 to 10. A good rule of thumb is 3 to 5, but you can do whatever is best for your organization. Next slide. Great. Another thing that is really good to do if you have time is environmental scanning. I also have templates and tools for this if it's something that you're interested in. So this is where you have a mixed group of people, leaders and employees, managers at different levels. And you try to think about what is going to come down in the next couple of years. So you think about like if budget stays the same or if budget increases, and if technology stays the same and the technology increases, and you think of like what could happen with each one of these scenarios, and you try to think about, okay, are we prepared if this one happens, if this one happens? Because we all know we can prepare as much as possible, but we never really know what's happening. And this can kind of help you with succession planning too. So if like out of that environmental scanning, you say, oh my gosh, like I didn't even think about what would happen if we lose all of our admin folks, you know, what are we going to do? So we really should think about their succession planning. It can kind of help you think about maybe other pieces of the puzzle that you haven't thought about before. Next slide. So we've done all of that, right, to lay the base. And you're like, oh my gosh, we haven't even talked about succession planning yet. And the reason is because we sometimes go into this with way too big goals. And so we try to do, they're really lofty and they're too big, right? And we've kind of lost the focus. So we want to do strategic alignment first to really figure out like what group of people do we want to focus on, or what competency do we want to focus on, or what pool of people do we want to focus on. So once we have that big idea kind of narrowed down a little bit more, right, then we have to figure out what our target is and what our pool is. So again, so say we just did strategic alignment and we realized that we are really behind with some of our technology folks, right? We just don't have the competencies needed for that. So now we'd say, okay, our computer folks, we really need to focus on them. Half of them are getting ready to retire, and the other half just really aren't even up to speed on certain competencies that we need, right? So that's kind of our target. That's what we know that we need to focus on. Yes, we need to focus on leadership and all of those things too, but right now this is what we're focusing on, right? Because it's our biggest kind of threat. So then we have to figure out who is our pool of people, right? Like who is interested in learning more about computers or about the certain competencies that we need, right? So we can either ask them, do interviews with some staff, or we can also send out a large survey and kind of see who's really interested in learning more about this. So that's where we get into phase 2. Next slide. So when we are thinking about the target, right, identifying the succession target, we have to think about, are they an MCO, right? Are they critical to the mission? Are they critical support positions? So again, a lot of times we think about succession planning only as leadership, which is very important. But we can also think about those that are either MCOs or those critical support positions. And so this is where you kind of have to think about what is our actual target. Yes, we love to do succession planning for every single person all the time. But if we just have to focus on one, what are those ones that we're focusing on? So these are just some definitions. Next slide. So again, we can think about, do we want just senior leader positions? Do we want admin positions? Do we want those single point of failures, right? Those standalone positions? Do we want to focus on hard to fill positions? A lot of times we get asked to help with those kinds of things. Do we want to focus on the positions that have high turnover? Do we want to focus on people who maybe are out for a really long extended time? So again, we have to think about what is best for our agency, our group, what is really our succession targets that we want to focus on. Next slide. If none of that is really helping, right? Or if it is, but you kind of want to focus in even more, you can focus on competencies too, right? So with a client I'm working on now, they are wanting to do succession planning for just leadership in general, because they feel like a lot of their workforce needs a lot of help with leading people, leading change, difficult conversations. And so they're kind of focusing on the competency skills that they want. So for this, they're doing like a survey where they're kind of analyzing their workforce, and they're figuring out, okay, we need to really focus on leading people. A lot of our people just really need some help kind of having leadership skills in general, and they want to make sure that pool is bigger. So for them, they're thinking about, what are the developmental opportunities that they can provide to a lot of people. So if you can't really think of a position, you can go with competencies. And if you have thought of a position that you really want to focus on, or positions, you should also always start kind of like looking at competencies first, because another way to kind of avoid doing pre-selection or things like that is to not focus on, oh, Jennifer's a great employee, so I want the next person to be just like Jennifer. You want it to say, okay, Jennifer is good at oral communication and project management, leading people, right? Whatever it is. And so you're like, okay, I want to focus on those competencies and I want to build those in our people. Next slide. In case we're not familiar with some of the words that I'm using, I want to make sure that I give a brief overview of what I'm talking about. So a competency is just a KSA, right? It's a knowledge, skill, and ability with behaviors and characteristics as well. And this is a competency is how you make sure that people are successful in their tasks. A competency model is all of those competencies together, right? So for me, as an HR specialist, I need to do this, 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 and this. And so all of those kind of make me as an HR specialist successful. A proficiency level is just, do I need to be a novice? Do I need to be an expert? What do I need to do? And then a behavioral example is, say, we say oral communication. Jennifer can lead at a level 5 because she can give a training clearly. Hopefully you guys can understand it. She can answer questions, things like that. Whereas maybe written communication, I only need to be, a level 3 because I don't write a ton of reports. Even though that's a lot, I write a ton of reports, but just an example. So those are some of the terms. And as you get into succession planning, if you really want to focus on those competencies, you might say, okay, I want to create more people that know about organizational, development, whatever it is. And so I want them all to be a level 3 if I can. And what does that mean? And you would write out behavioral examples of what that means. Because it's really hard to say, I just want you to be better. Well, what does that mean? I want you to be better at oral communication. What does that mean, right? You kind of want to make sure that you're very specific when you're doing this. This is a model where we talk about why competencies are so important. Because if you don't have a good competency model, all of the rest of the house falls in. So a lot of times we'll go into organizations and they'll be like, I want to do succession planning. And we'll say, oh, awesome. Can you show us your leadership competency models? Because that's the group that you want to focus on and they don't have any. And we're like, how can you tell someone to be a better leader if you don't really have a model for what makes them be a successful leader? So this is a slide showing that if you don't have competency models, that's a really great way to start. Because otherwise it's really difficult to just say, okay, be a better leader, because you really need to be more specific on what that means. Next slide. Another way to do succession planning, if you have enough time, is to do something that we call a competency gap analysis. So if you have a great competency model, you can actually survey your workforce to kind of see where they're at. So if you know that to be a good leader, you need to be at a level 4 for a lot of these competencies, and you survey your staff and most of them are not at that level, you know that you need to start developing those folks so that pool of people can be larger. And you don't always have to pay for trainings, right? We can do shadowing or things like that. But a competency gap analysis is a really good way to kind of determine where your pool of people are. And then determine what the work is that you need to kind of develop them. Next slide. So now I'm going to get into our 9-box talent matrix. So we call it the 9-box. We call it the talent matrix. I know there's 4 more words that we use as well. But this is one of our main tools that we actually use with our clients. Not always. We have a lot of different examples of things that we use. I'm actually working with like 4 different clients right now that we're not using it. So please know that we have lots of different tools, but this is one of our main ones that we created, and it's out on the internet too. A lot of people use it. That kind of helps determine where your bench strength is. Next slide. So this is what it looks like. So this is why it's called a 9 box, because there's actually 9 boxes. And the way that we do it is that we ask people to rate. So we'll just say leadership, because that's kind of the easiest one to kind of think through right now. We'll say we're focusing on leadership positions. We would ask people about their employees' performance and potential. And then the way the tool is set up, which again, I can send it out after, is it's an Excel spreadsheet. So you just go in and you put in your employees, each one of your employees, and you rate them on performance and potential, and it automatically populates it into this 9 box. So you can see where people are located. Next slide. And you'll say, okay, well, how do I know how to rate our folks, right? So performance should be easier because if you do any kind of performance rating system, it should correlate with that, right? So based on what their performance is, right? Are they highly successful? They meet expectations, or is there unsatisfactory performance? And we can change this depending on like what kind of performance rating system that you work with. This one should be fairly easy to kind of fill in, because if you have a good performance rating system, you can just fill that one in. Next question, or next slide. In terms of potential, this one you have to use a little bit more of your discretion. Meaning if you interact with your folks enough, right, you should know kind of what their engagement and aspiration is, but these are some questions to get you thinking about it. So are they high potential, right? Are they committed to their career transition? Do they want a bigger role, right? Or are they just medium potential, means they're great employees, but they just don't really have a huge desire to move into something right now, but they're definitely gaining some momentum, right? Or are they low potential? You know, they just don't really have they do their job, but they don't have a big motivation or commitment to kind of moving on. Next slide. And then these are some questions. And so when we do this with our clients, obviously, and you don't have to be our client, I will send this to you for free. We ask them, you know, do they always pitch in? Do they want recognition? These are just some questions that you can think about as a manager if you do decide to focus on leadership positions for succession planning, where you could kind of think about, okay, you know, what kind of engagement and aspiration do they actually show? Next slide. And then we think about turnover risk, right? So performance, potential, and then turnover risk. Those are the 3 things that we judge when we use the 9 box. And some people say, can I really ask my employee if they're going to leave? No, but based on the kind of relationship that you have with your employees, sometimes, you know, they're just going to tell you, like, you know, I really want a leadership position, so I'm looking right now. Obviously, you know, their turnover risk is probably higher, right? And if you're not really exactly sure how to ask this kind of question, you know, you could just say, like, is there something that we can do for you inside the organization that makes you, you know, more willing to stay? Or, you know, you could, you know, just ask them, you know, what are kind of their goals for the next couple of years. So no, maybe not say, are you going to leave tomorrow? But maybe ask them what their goals are. Did I see a hand go up? Okay. Next slide. And based on all of those things that I just told you, the spreadsheet kind of adds all of those things together. And then you can see where people are in terms of succession planning, right? So this kind of gives you a snapshot of the employee's readiness, right? And none of this means that anyone is guaranteed to move up into another position, into a leadership position. None of it says that they're, you know, great at their job or they're not. This is only about succession planning and about development and about creating that pool of people. So if you complete the 9 box and you see that you have a ton of people who are ready now, that they could move into greater roles, you're doing pretty good, right? But if you do this and you see that a lot of people are in that low, like they're going to be ready in the next 3 years, you know that you might have to start doing a little bit more shadowing or, you know, counseling or coaching or whatever it is that you need to do. All of this really just means, how are we going to help develop our people so that our pool of people is ready? It doesn't mean that anyone's guaranteed. It doesn't mean that anyone's a good or bad employee at all. It's just like a snapshot to kind of see where your readiness is. Next slide. So this is what it looks like in like the 9-box form. So you can see where people are ready and where your kind of pool of people is kind of set up. And if you would like to use this tool, the best part about the tool is at the end, it kind of helps you understand. So for those boxes that say not ready, what can I do to help those people? And it gives you a whole bunch of examples that you can kind of use to help them. How do I keep those people who are ready now really motivated? Because what if there's no leadership positions ready for the next couple of years, right? So how can I keep them engaged? So that's kind of the coolest part of the talent box or 9-box. This is why it has 4 names, because I confuse it all the time. That kind of is really awesome. So again, we'll send that out after so you guys can use that as well. Next slide. Oh, perfect. I forgot about this one. So this kind of explains what each box is, right? So if you have a whole bunch of people who are in those green boxes, you know, they're ready to go. They meet all of the developmental requirements of the target position and they're ready to go. Whereas, you know, those maybe that are in those, that orangey color, you know, they satisfy the standards, but they're not actively kind of developing to the next level. So that might be something that you need to do as a leader. Next slide. I also have some other tools that I will share with you. I forgot that since I'm not presenting, I can't show them all to you, so we'll send those out. There's lots of different tools that we use besides just the 9-box as well. That's one that we use more because it's kind of easier to understand. But I'll send these ones out as well. There's things that we use like a position profile. We have an assessment that if you want something that's really very particular for each employee, that we did for ORA. That one is for usually smaller organizations. I also am doing something different for a few of my other clients. So I'll send all of those out too. So you have lots of different examples for tools if you want an actual tool for succession planning to use. So once we do all of that work, right, you're like, oh my gosh, we're still only on session or phase 3. Oh my gosh. But 1 and 2 are like the biggest data collection parts, right? We have to figure out what is it, what succession target are we focusing on? Who's our pool of people? Where are they at? Then we can move into phase 3, which is where we create a plan. So I figured out that our leadership positions are the most crucial right now. You know, I did some interviews with all of our folks. We did the 9-box and I figured out, oh my goodness, you know, a lot of our folks are not ready yet. So I have all of this data. So now I have to move into phase 3. Like, how do I fix this, right? How do I create a plan? So that's where phase 3 comes in. Next slide. So we have to think about, after I pulled in all of that data from 1 and 2, from phase 1 and 2, I have to think about where are my gaps, right? So is there a retention problem I need to worry about? Is there trends that I need to worry about? Or is it really just, I have a whole bunch of young folks, young as in their career, that just have not had enough exposure to leadership yet, and I need to close those gaps in some way. So I have to kind of think about what is it that I'm trying to solve after gathering all of that data. Next slide. So is it that I need to mentor folks more, right? Or do we not have IDPs and that's something I need to create? Or do I just need to start letting people shadow more to get some more leadership exposure, or encourage more rotations? Like say, you know, I just don't have a lot of leadership opportunities in my group. So can I just let people go to other units to get more leadership exposure, right? If I'm just focusing on leadership for this example, you know, what do I have to do to kind of close that gap? That's what phase 3 is, right? What are we going to do now to kind of make sure that we're successful in the next step? Next slide. So if we think about an example that I'm working on now, they have about 80% of their leaders who are eligible to retire in the next year. So they're pretty worried about it, right? And after we did step 1 and step 2, we realized we did sort of like a 9-box. It was a little bit different. We realized that most of them just don't really have any leadership. They just have not gotten enough leadership exposure. So their phase 3, the way that they're going to implement a plan is they're actually creating career paths for their position so that people really can see what competencies they need for each level and how they can get those. So they're doing career paths, and they're also doing professional coaching that they have. So we have to think about in phase 3, how are we going to give those people more of the leadership exposure that they need, or the technology that they need? You know, how are we going to kind of close that? Next slide. A biggest piece for me, and I'm going to go on my soapbox here for a minute, is I feel like a big part of figuring out how to close gaps is knowledge management. You can also call it knowledge transfer, but knowledge management is a way of ensuring that the information that we have now is transferred to the next group, right? To as many people as possible, to promote learning and growing, and make sure that we all kind of understand what's going on. When I go in and do succession planning, that's usually the piece that people are most worried about. Like, our leaders have so much information and like it's not written down, or it hasn't been transferred over. So I feel like knowledge management or knowledge transfer should always be a part of that plan, because it's one of the easier ones that we can do, because sometimes if we can't get someone hired right away, at least we have 5 people that kind of understand what it is that needs to be done for that role. And at least we can help kind of fill that gap until someone gets hired on or trained up or whatever it is. Next slide. So in case you don't know about knowledge management, you know, it obviously is when people come in, we have onboarding and all of those things. In the middle, we share all the information. And at the end, you know, when people leave or hire or, you know, transfer out, I'm kind of talking about that knowledge out part, even though all of the other ones are just as important. When we think about succession planning, a lot of times it's really important to kind of focus on that bottom part, because maybe people have been there for 20, 30, 40 years, and all of that information is up there. So we have to think of, you know, do we interview that person or video that person or have them write all their information down, so that's not really just lost when that person leaves. Next slide. Oh no. Okay. If that is the last slide, let me pull up. Hold on one second. The rest of the slides, and I will just talk off of them. I'm not sure why you didn't get the full slide deck. My apologies. So the other pieces of knowledge management that I want to talk about, and I will send you a whole bunch of examples of knowledge management that I have after this. I'm sorry, I'm trying to pull up the slide deck. Please forgive me. I'm gonna wing this. Okay. So the other pieces that I wanted to talk about with knowledge management is that there's lots of different ways that we can kind of think about capturing knowledge management. So there's things like I'm sorry, expertise mapping, where we like ask everyone kind of what they're interested in and maybe knowledge that we don't know that they have, so they can share it with other people. There's also things like communities of practice, different kind of formats that we can use around communities of practice. There's also something that we think about where we bring in an expert, a middleman, and then like a novice, and we have them work on a project together so that everyone can kind of learn from each other. I have lots of different templates and tools that I can share with you guys around knowledge management as well. But this is one that I think is really, really, really important to make sure that we focus on when we put it into our implementation plan, is what I'm trying to get at. Okay, so I know you guys can't see this, so I'm going to just quickly go over the last 2 phases of the model. If you can go back to whoever's running the slide deck, if you can go back to slide, I think it's 12, the OPM succession planning model, at least folks can see what steps 4 and 5 are, so at least I can talk about those. So the OPM succession planning model. So step 4 is where we actually implement the succession planning, the plan. So here we want to communicate our strategies and monitor our strategies. That's what phase 4 is. And a really important piece of phase 4 is to make sure that we are collecting metrics and data, right? If we say that our goal was to make sure that everyone is at a level 3 of leadership competencies, right? We want to make sure that we have like the before data, right, of maybe a competency model analysis that we did. And then we want to make sure that we look at where people are after we've tried to develop them, right? So we want to make sure that we have lots of different metrics to make sure that we are showing that we are successful, right? Oh, that's your slide. Okay, can you find the one that's just the model, the OPM model with the star in the middle? Sorry, I'm not sure how everything got messed up there, but the one that has the star in the middle, and that's called OPM succession planning model. And the last phase is phase 5, which is how we evaluate the succession planning model. Perfect, thank you. So when we evaluate the succession planning model, so say we've done all of these steps, right? We've established strategic alignment, we've done the targets, we've developed our plan, we've implemented it. We have to see if we've actually been successful. And this is the thing that I see the most people not do, is they never kind of follow through and see if we were successful. So for example, if I look back at how this training went today, right, I'd be like, okay, I think I did pretty good, but I don't know what happened with the slides. I was like 80% successful, right? Next time I'll make sure that, I double check that we have the amount of slides. A lot of times we never do that follow through, right? We never kind of make sure that we analyze. So say, for example, we said that our leadership positions were the most important. And then by the end of it, we don't have a bigger pool. I wouldn't say that we failed, we still did a great job, but we want to make sure that we recommend improvements, right? So maybe we need to interview different people or use different tools, right? A lot of our clients, the first time it doesn't go well and we have to try again, right? So when I talked about that one client who realized they needed to build up trust first, that's kind of what happened. We realized that we started doing succession planning and employees were like, I'm not interested in this. We had to pause, we had to go to the evaluation part and we had to say, okay, we realize that we need to gain a lot more trust first and understanding of what succession planning is before we can actually use any kind of tool, right? Before we could put anybody's name kind of in a box, we had to make sure that we did those things first. So that's what evaluation means. We want to make sure that we do the full gamut and kind of understand, what are we trying to get at? So some common evaluation metrics are, can we fill those key jobs faster, right? Are we trying to, make sure our pool of people is a certain number? Are we making sure that we have 10 ready now for every position or 5, whatever it is that we're trying to evaluate. So we want to make sure that we have a good metric in place. And that is all I have for you today. So I'm going to go back to here and see what kind of questions I have, or if I can answer anything in the 1 minute that I have left.
Yes, Jennifer, thanks so much. This was so much great information, and I appreciate the sharing of tools, as well as really talking about the barriers and how to overcome them in this process. And this continues a theme from yesterday that we also heard was making sure there's ownership from the leaders and supervisors and not just seeing it as a human capital project. And we do have some supervisors on the phone, so I think that will also help us as we continue that messaging about sharing this partnership. And I do have one question for you from Kashinte. It's how would you recommend starting to establish strategic alignment for succession planning if there hasn't been robust efforts previously?
That's a great question. And I think you kind of just nailed it when you said you have to make sure that you get leadership commitment. So if there's never been a robust effort ever, which it happens in like 80% of the clients that we get, the first thing that we as consultants have to do, and you, whoever's trying to do this, is we have to get all of leadership involved. That's like number one, because if you can't get them involved, there's really no point of moving forward because you're not going to have a good effort. So a lot of times it's just getting those leaders at the table and asking them what they think succession planning is, because sometimes we're not even on the same page of what we think succession planning is. So once we get like a basic understanding, we get everyone at the table, we get a basic understanding of succession planning in general, then you can start asking them like what their focus is for succession planning. And once you kind of get their ideas, then you can jump into kind of collecting more data, because if you don't get everyone at the table, it's never going to keep going. So that's kind of how we as consultants try to do it when we go into clients. Yeah, that's a great question.
Yes. Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for everything. And I look forward to all the information you'll be sharing. And I'm very sure there'll be others reaching out to OPM from this call. There are several agencies actually present, even though it is a small audience today. But thank you so much. And we'll go ahead and get started with the next panel.
Thank you
Thanks,
so much.
Jennifer. All righty. Good morning to both Viking and Michael, who will be our next speakers and our panelists coming up. So let me get to the introductions. So Michael Byrd Sr. Is assumed full responsibility as Deputy to the Executive Director of Human Capital Services and the Chief Learning Officer on July 5th of 2020. In this role, he serves as the primary driver of strategic initiatives and operations. He supports the Executive Director in providing program and project management oversight and executes strategic guidance using program integration and implementation, business modernization, and improvement. Mr. Byrd retired from active duty in 2014 after serving in a variety of leadership positions over a span of 31 years with the U.S. Army. So I'd also like to take this time to thank you for your service. He was a paratrooper in the continental United States and overseas, including North Africa, Haiti, Bosnia, and Korea. Mr. Byrd has a distinguished service with 160th distinguished service with the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, known as the Night Stalkers, and was awarded the Bronze Star Medal for conducting over 30 combat missions with the 1st Infantry Division in Iraq. And now I'd like to talk about Mr. Viking White, who is also on this panel this morning. Mr. Viking K. White was selected as the U.S. Department of Education Chief Learning Officer and Director of Talent Development Division on November 8th of 2020. His division provides world-class professional and leadership development services and competency closing activities and opportunities to achieve the department's mission, infusing talent and enhanced proficiencies for all 4,000 of the ED workforce. In his dual-headed role as CLO and division chief, he is responsible for both the learning and development strategy at Department of Ed and bringing this vision to life through tactical efforts across the department. Both Viking and Michael will be sharing their presentations on their leadership development continues and frameworks, and then I will lead a Q&A panel with them. I believe Michael Byrd will be presenting first. I know there were some technical difficulties. Michael, are you up here? Let's see. Let's get on board. If not, we're going to go ahead and get started with Viking's presentation, if that's possible, Jeff.
I just promoted, Michael was in the general attendance. I just promoted him to a panelist.
Perfect.
Hopefully he sees the cue.
Hey, Kalada, I think that Viking's presentation is first anyway, so that actually worked perfectly.
All right, perfect. Well, I'll transfer over to you, Mr. White.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for asking me to join this panel. I am very happy to be here. So let me start for this. As you just heard, I'm the Chief Learning Officer from the Department of Education, and I'm going to provide you a short presentation about the trajectory and the information that we have for leadership training and competency closing activities. For the Department of Ed, you can't imagine us looking at this particular quote, and just this encapsulates everything that we do, not only within the department, but of course our key stakeholders, school administrations, schools around the country, and of course, America's school children. Next slide, please. And so again, I'm going to be talking about leadership development in the Department of Education. Next slide, Jeff. And click it again. Keep going 2 more times. 1 more. So I'm not going to read this particular vision, but this is something that we take hold as we look at every development program that put together for leaders. This is something in which we look at specifically for behaviors that every leader should not only enhance, but display as they are in that leadership position. But it doesn't necessarily start at the leader being in that particular chair. It's a trajectory, but it's also a journey in which they take to build a vision that supports not only their particular office, their principal office or business unit, but of course, the organizational goals of their particular department. Next slide, Jeff. Thank you very much. So this is what we value. When you look at these particular 5 bullets, we're looking for leaders that show the capabilities and the proficiencies, but also the behaviors that will allow the department to continue the great work for its key stakeholder. So when you look at the very first bullet, embrace and demonstrate leadership excellence, we need to see that from our leaders every single day. As you heard from the previous speaker, Jennifer Breeden, you have supervisors, leaders, we get commitment and buy-in from them every single day. And so when it comes to leadership capabilities and showing what you provide, these are the type of things that we need to see from leaders, from inspiring excellence, which is the second bullet, to go all the way down to the last one, which is engaging in collaborative efforts across principal offices. Because what makes a very strong leader is not just circling themselves with the best people, but they have that connection within and outside of their organization to bring those new ideas and solutions to help us achieve our organizational goals. Next slide, Jeff. Thank you. And so when you look at this slide, so now we're starting to dive down even further. What does it mean, not only leadership training, but also for a leader? And so every leader, really any employee of the federal government, they're going to have a certain proficiency level or standard or something to gauge their success. And of course, at the Department of Education, we have the same thing. In this case, this is for our leaders. So when you look at the very first one, we're talking about descriptions of a developmental progression. As you read that information, this is what we're looking at when it comes to that overarching definition of what these proficiency levels will be. So this sets up not only the trajectory, but also the cadence, the type of information that we want to see from those leaders as they sit in those particular jobs and makes those critical decisions to allow us to achieve the goals of the department. But also, this provides information to leaders or soon to be leaders or those who want to be leaders. What is the type of behaviors and competencies am I supposed to display? Am I supposed to hone so I can show that I can be that next stage leader coming up? Next slide, Jeff. Thank you. And so now we're starting to identify what you're looking at is something the department created in 2011. It's still sound. It still makes sense for us to use this. We did some alterations and some adjustments, not to this language, but how do we deliver it to the organization. So these proficiency levels and what you're looking at now from 1 to 5 make up what's called our leadership competency model, or LCM, leadership competency model. So now we're looking at a self-leader, where they sit at the particular stage of the organization and also based on their particular job role, going all the way down to executive, which of course is the senior executive service member. And so at each stage, this provides the nominal language and behaviors that we expect from each one of these at this level. And also from those at a particular level, it shows from the next one, what are the expectations of leadership? What are the expectations of competencies and capabilities and proficiencies they are supposed to display as they go through these stages? And if their goal or a particular journey leads to executive, then it also goes there also. Next slide, Jeff. Great. And so now we go from the proficiency levels, and now we're talking about ED's 4 overarching leadership competencies. Starting from the left, as you're looking at this, leading self. Well, this is you. This is the employee looking at themselves. What about my interpersonal skills, or anything that I need to hone there, anything I need to ensure that I can work with other individuals with, whether they're on my team or throughout my organization. What are my technical excellence? How can I show that? How can I show that behavior that I know and can perform the role that I'm in? Integrity, enough said there. We have to have that. And then, of course, adaptability, because we're always being shown different things in which we have to show that flexibility to bring different tools and skills to get the job done. So as you see this going from leading self all the way to leading upward and outward, some would say, and probably correctly, wow, this seems like something akin to executive core qualifications, which is what senior executive service team members, not team members, but members have to display 5, but of course, 21 more accompanying capabilities to show that they are achieving in that role as an SES. So what the department did in 2011, they wanted to take something similar to that, but break it down for all employees, those employees who are not in the SES. And so this is what you're seeing here. And these particular competencies and key behaviors do cross over, because you can see a linkage going from leading self. Of course, you're making sure you have what you need to perform accurately, to perform the job at a certain level. And as you go through that cadence from leading others, because you're moving into a leadership role, leading results, absolutely, because you're in that role to achieve the outcomes of the particular goals of your organization. And then last, this is more collaborative. This is what you're bringing, a little bit more astute, critical thinking, strategic thinking at that particular level. Next slide, Jeff. Keep on, there's multiple, I'll tell you, keep going, sir. Thank you. Keep going. Probably 2 more times, I believe. One more. Great. And so what we wanted to show you here is, first you start off, as I showed you on the prior slide, your leading self, but now you're looking at certain behaviors of that leading self, starting with recognizing the profound impact of personal behavior on others. And of course, how you react to other individuals impact. You need to be able to understand that. What does that mean? All of us have something called a blind spot, and a course or training or understanding in emotional intelligence allows you to understand that and how you can relate successfully and better to others. So as you start going down this information of leading self, this is what we're presenting to ED employees. We want them to understand and of course ensure that they have this area not only honed and enhanced to a capability that they're successful, but also as they start going through this, they're successful for others. So if you look on the right side, we talk about that. And now if and when, really when, they're in a leadership role or leadership capability, and remember, leadership doesn't necessarily have to mean that you're in a certified or recognized role. All of us are leaders in a particular situation that we're in. And if we raise our hand to either move forward or offer an idea and then take it on ourselves from an accountability standpoint to move that idea forward, we can be called leaders. And so under this capability, how are we leading that particular team? Again, don't have to be a leader per se, but how are we leading others to ensure that that particular task or item is being completed successfully. So as you scroll down and look at this information, from leading others to achieve high performance, all the way down to works collaboratively with others, with and engage in cross-functional activities, this is how you start building upon each item under these overarching areas, starting with leading self, and then of course, going with leading others. Next slide, sir. Keep going, sir, and we're going to go to leading upward. Yes, sir. Thank you. All right. And so now leading results, because the first two areas from self and leading others get you to this. This is more strategic. This is more critical because you're starting to provide information, not information, but outcomes that focus on the goals of the organization. So when you look at leading results, starting with the first one there, develop effective strategies and implements plans to achieve organizational goals and objectives. You are planning on showing outcomes, deliverables, if you want to use that word, but you are providing, here is a task. I've strategized it. I've got my team together. I've looked at supporting activities, and I'm bringing it to finalization to achieve whatever the goal is. And all of this, when you're looking at leading results, is what we're looking at as behaviors that leader is supposed to show us. So when she is in that chair, she is showing those behaviors that are very successful under leading results. We move from leading results to leading upward and outward. I mentioned earlier, this is more a collaborative effort. This is you looking outward, building those networks, those teams of individuals, not necessarily within AmeriCorps, but outside of the organization that has a certain capability, a certain knowledge that you can use to go back one step to leading results, to actually do that. And so when you look at all four of these areas, they go an upward trajectory for you to be successful, but also to achieve those goals of the organization. Next slide, sir. So that was the last one for me, just an overall leadership development program coming from the model, leadership competency model. And next, I will turn it over to my colleague, Michael.
Good morning, everyone. Had some technical difficulties early, but those have been resolved. So if I can get my Oprah lighting correct. You all know that Oprah lighting makes everything look better, and I need all the help I can get this morning. So I am honored and pleased to be with you today. I just want to take the time to talk a little bit about development, why it matters, and also share some learning and development services that we offer in the VA. Next slide, please. Okay, we talked about this in the introduction, so thank you, Ms. Holmes, for that great introduction. But I'd just like to highlight that I am an advocate for lifelong learning, and through this advocacy and journey, it has allowed me to serve in management and leadership positions across the globe. Next slide, please. Here, I like to highlight that employees are our greatest asset. You, all of the employees within the VA, and all of our learning and development programs are essential to achieving the VA's organizational goals, okay? A meaningful workforce development and development programs connect to our human capital management cycle, and it also closes those critical skill gaps that we have throughout our organization. We feel that to best serve the veterans in the VA and their families who rely on our services, we need engaged and developed employees to do that, which is why a culture of continuous learning is central to our approach to succession management and planning. And I know Ms. Holmes remember the challenges that we had in trying to get together our succession management plan. She was central to that, and we're still working to make that a process and a program that that should be a model across the federal space. You see these two data points reflecting percentages of how U.S. workers feel about training and development, and the skill set changes in the future, especially with the advancement of artificial intelligence. Next slide, please. At the VA, I'm a part of Human Capital Services Center, and we provide professional development and personnel accountability services for over 600,000 customers, including employees, contractors, medical residents, interns, and volunteers. And we are committed to all of our employees' development and making our workforce future ready. A little phrase that we like to use. Next slide, please. No two employees are alike. I think we can all attest to that. and everyone learns differently, have different goals, strengths, and areas for growth, and that is at a different place in their professional development journey. One way HR professionals can ensure employees that can have access to the programs and services that are available in AmeriCorps, you can hit them right at onboarding during that process. 70% of critical adult learning occurs through experience, and I encourage all of you to identify opportunities for growth and development. These opportunities could include things that really don't cost anything, such as micro-learning, details, shadowing a senior leader, or some stretch assignments that you can volunteer for. Next slide. The VA Leadership Development Framework, or we refer to it as the LDF, is a change in the way in which we view continuous learning. And it puts the ownership for development on the VA team members or the individual employee. You, as an employee, are in the driver's seat, and the LDF serves as a roadmap for your career journey, your professional development journey. The foundations we use to develop the LDF include the I-CARE values, which we have in the Veterans Administration, which means integrity, commitment, advocacy, respect, and excellence. In addition to that, we utilize servant leadership principles, OPM leadership competencies, and research on the leadership pipeline. We want every employee to know what they can expect from the VA and what the VA expects from them regarding development in any profession across the department. I know Department of Defense has a very, very, very good career mapping program. So once you start off in civilian service with DoD, you kind of know where you are and where you could go if you desire to pursue positions of increased responsibility. Next slide. Okay, this is just some positive feedback that we received from a few of our participants in some of the programs that we offer. Next slide. Okay, to ensure a welcoming environment for all of our veterans, we have to foster a fair and inclusive workplace where experiences and perspectives from our diverse employees are valued. We have the Consolidated Internship Program provides a centralized approach to ensuring VA hiring managers can give them the ability to connect with diverse talent from across the country. This is a great program that we run, and I'm a very, very big advocate of that. Next slide, please. Like all of you at the VA, we're busier than ever, fostering a culture of continuous learning. And this is through informal micro-learning and continuously building our culture of continuous learning. We have access to LinkedIn Learning, which allows our employees to learn on the go. Also, e-learning allows employees to find quick answers to pressing problems or to develop skills and complete certifications at their own pace. We also offer coaching and mentoring as a part of our learning and development programs. And there is an initiative for my organization to expand that throughout the department. Next slide, please. Investing in learning and development only pays dividends when employees know what resources are available to them and how to use them, okay? In my organization, we have a people-first communication strategy when discussing and sharing learning and development opportunities. So this means we take the guessing out of it, and we use hard data to drive all of our decisions through AES scores, journey maps, and things of that nature. We know that messages are most effective when they come from trusted sources. We all get 9 million emails during the course of the day, and we work very, very hard to become a trusted brand across the second largest federal agency in the United States. Next slide. This brings me to the end of my presentation, and hopefully I provided small insight into some of the services and programs that we provide and a renewed interest in professional development and continuous learning. Appreciate your attention, and I will turn it over to Ms. Holmes. I think we're going to pivot to the panel.
Yes, thank you so much, Michael and Viking. Appreciate you all sharing your agency's approaches to your leadership development frameworks. I think we've all seen there are definitely some similarities in both leadership development frameworks. Because across the government, we are leveraging many of the same resources, such as OPM's Leadership Continuum, as well as I think we all have the same leadership needs and challenges, which leads me to the first question, and whoever would like to answer first can. How did creating these leadership development frameworks positively impact your agency, and what results have you seen?
I'll take that. Implementing the VA leadership development framework has had a positive impact. And this is through giving employees, regardless of the grade or supervisory status, a tool to map their career. As we all know, development and learning and training is not mandatory in the federal space. So it gives employees the option, those who would like to pursue those opportunities. Hey, this is a map for me. It also provides clear expectations of what to expect of them as an employee and what they can expect from the VA in their professional career with the organization.
That's great. I'd like to add to that, and definitely Michael is right. Learning and development in a lot of cases is not a mandatory endeavor. Of course, we've heard of mandatory training, but that's boasting, enhancing skills for your particular job skill, your particular role in your job. One of the things that I have to really focus on, and we too, Department of Ed, have a leadership development framework, very similar to what VA has. We have to think about and strategize the type of capabilities that we are looking to sort of retrieve from our employees. But the first thing we have to do is we have a large number of bargaining unit employees. And so we have to make sure that we are partnering with that bargaining unit first, get their buy-in, questions, ensuring that what we're doing is conducive and matches the collective bargaining unit. So we don't just send things out, on a whim. We strategize the program, and then the next step is to partner with our union partners to make sure from them that we've answered all their questions, and then we can actually deliver that program. And as Michael said, we're looking to develop that force, that ed workforce, to be a very successful component, because you can't do things without the workforce of your organization.
Thank you both. And so now the question I think we all want to know the answer to is, what were the challenges or barriers, in implementing these within your organizations? And what are any lessons learned that you would share with those of us who are embarking on creating our own frameworks?
Okay.
Well, go ahead, Viking.
Okay, no problem. And as I just mentioned, it looks like VA and Ed has similar leadership development frameworks. And so as I was listening into the end of the presentation from Jennifer Breeden, she brought up two things that I'm sure even Michael will probably even speak on, or at least does in his organization, is anything from a leadership development or learning and development idea, you got to get that commitment from leadership. This is a top-down approach. You get that first. For us, as I mentioned, next, we would actually go to our bargaining unit partners, provide them that information so they can give us some feedback to see where we're going. But the challenge is that I'm not going to say we actually had any challenges. I know we had a very good program going forward. We knew where we wanted to go. And so our next step was build the communication plan, build that buy-in strategy so we can express this to our leaders and so they can make any ideas or recommendations on changes, because of course you're dealing with multiple different mission critical occupations or job series that will be exposed to this training. Next, is, of course, even in conjunction with the plan for us, is a budget. Sometimes people have these great ideas, but if you can't fund it, if that's what you're going to do, you got to be able to fund it. In my particular area, I have a lot of program managers in my learning and development space, but not a lot of instructors or facilitators. So a lot of times we're contracting out for best practice services to bring those into the department. So that is one strategy, making sure that you have the budget to move forward. And also, once you have the scope of whatever this idea or this activity or this opportunity is, as Michael had mentioned, what is this going to be? Is this a month long? Is it a 12 months? Is it micro learning? What is the scope? And then once you have that, what's the outcome that you're trying to achieve? What are the behaviors that you're trying to achieve with that? And so again, everyone's busy. We know that, but you're looking at supervisors and asking their feedback. Okay, if we're going to provide this particular opportunity, what's your feedback on this? Is this something that your employees would relish? Unlike a lot of organizations in the federal government, IDPs, individual development plans, are optional in the Department of Education, not mandatory. So they're strongly encouraged. So I have to motivate, I have to promote through different avenues and opportunities. So employees will look at these activities and say, wow, that is something very interesting. I want to be a part of that. So those are just some of the strategies or some of the challenges that we could go through as we bring out learning and development opportunities for the department.
I would say, given the size of my organization, some of the biggest challenges are effectively communicating to every employee. We have what I refer to as the big three within the VA, and those are all of our large administrations: VHA, VBA, and NCA. And then sometimes when we're implementing or developing new strategies, we not only have to make sure that there's strategic alignment with the overarching VA, the headquarters, but we have to consider their strategic goals for their specific organizations. So that's like challenge, a huge challenge. And it's not always easy to try to communicate with such a large employee base and everybody's on the same page. Unlike DoD, when the big voice in the sky says the entire Department of Defense is going to do X, everybody does it. We're a little different. So we have to diplomatically work through that challenge to get the word out and make sure that we have support. So one of my recommendations would be what we're employing right now is kind of locally based staff to serve as ambassadors or champions of your learning strategies on the ground. We've had a lot of success with that, and I think that's a pretty good approach from the ground up. Another recommendation would be to start small with one job series, such as 201 or some technical career field, and start that as a pilot, and then see how that goes. And you get buy-in. Once people see that that's pretty successful and they see how that is going, you get buy-in on a larger scale.
No, thank you. As soon as you said that, I think that is one of the biggest challenges for those of us who come from DoD, is that when someone says go from the Pentagon, everyone just goes. But as also a former VA employee, definitely not the same. So how are your leadership continuums or frameworks used to support your agency's succession planning program? Is there a direct integration, or is it used as a data point for those programs?
So our framework basically serves as the foundation for every leadership and development opportunity sponsored by the VA. In that way, it supports the talent pipeline and it supports succession planning. I mentioned earlier in my briefing that we have some more work to do in that area. Kalada, your work did not go in vain. I think someone has picked up in the Chico's office, picked up that baton and kind of moved the football a little further down the road. But we still have some work to do with regards to succession management and succession planning. It's managed by the Chico, not the Chief Learning Officer, which creates some internal challenges within itself, but we're working through that. And I would just close by saying, as leaders, we have a responsibility to assist in the development of all of our employees, regardless of what level that is, and then try to tie that into the overarching succession management goal.
Thank you.
A lot of that is a very good question. I'm going to pick up where Michael just left off concerning overarching. And so for the Department of Education, specifically in my area, I'm working with a division called the Human Capital Strategy Division. So their role is to develop the succession plan for the entire department. So that's the, well, I was going to say foundation. The foundation, of course, is the EDGE strategy. In the EDGE strategy, there is an objective in which we will train and develop our employees at a certain performance level. So it starts from the top. Next, it comes down into the human capital strategy to build that succession plan in the workforce planning maturity model. So we partner with the Human Capital Strategy Division. So once they have that strategy, it's our role to take that piece to focus it more on job series or mission critical occupational training. But what we want to do, because we have a competency model, we have a tool to assess employees and their job skills, the next stage, obviously the next stage, is to look at leadership. Because with a competency model, you're going to have multiple job series. It's going to be different each time you do it. But if you have leadership, you can see that leadership behaviors are the same across the board. Yes, every organization is going to have a certain priority. I want to see this versus that. But in general, leadership behaviors will be leadership behaviors. So that will be the next stage for us to actually do that, because we want to be able to not only measure what we're doing now, competencies in your job series, but also measure leadership trajectory. And so that will put you in a very good position for open opportunities that will be available in the department. So all of that ties into the EDGE strategy going forward to develop the employees at a certain capability and proficiency level.
Thank you. I think that leads into my next question as well about what tools or methodologies have your agencies developed or are developing to help employees and supervisors know when you've moved from one level to the other. So when you've moved from leading self to leading others, or that you're ready for opportunities that would employ those competencies.
I'll go ahead and just finish what I started on. So since we're asking the question tools or methodologies, this is really an ongoing effort. So right now, our priority is on competencies, job series. We've got about 15 different job series in our organization. What we're doing is we're completing 5 job series, technically models, and these models will have technical and general competencies embedded. But also, that's a training plan. So also we have the career map. And so this information provides a list of activities, opportunities, recommendation of courses, mentorships, things like that, in which the employee can review and determine, are these opportunities good for themselves for career advancement. So once we have most, or really about 50% of the models, job series done, and the associated assessments in conjunction, as I mentioned earlier, now we're going to look at assessing the leadership capability. And so for that employee to see themselves moving from a self-leader to the next stage, we're going to have that assessment to actually tell them that. And of course, while that's being ongoing and developed, we're focusing on supervisors to have those types of discussions. So not necessarily wait on the Office of Human Resources. They should be having those continuing discussions at the same time that we're measuring the performance capability of that employee, because something may pop out to show that a supervisor, wow, you're showing some great technical capability, but I'm seeing some things that really focus in the leadership side of the house. That way we can start providing courses, opportunities, even details, which I was hearing described from the previous speaker, Jennifer Breeden, that we would also provide to that very high caliber employee to give them that experience or leadership exposure, as I heard the word that Jennifer mentioned.
The VA, like Vikings organization, that's a work in progress for us. That would be kind of, I guess, phase 3, if you will. The first phase is the leadership development framework. And by virtue of the size of our organization, I mean, it's going to take some time. You can't turn an aircraft carrier, kind of on a dime. So just the strategic communication piece and getting everyone familiar with that framework, what it is, how can it work for you in helping with your career development and mapping your career path. Once that is complete, and then the intent is to pivot to some type of model to actually show the employee where they are in this. Hey, I've checked off this, the emerging leader, I'm moving on to this. But like Viking commented on, a lot of that responsibility falls on the first line supervisor as well, to communicate, this is where you are in terms of professional development, the way I see it, and then have that discussion with that employee and giving them some options on not only where they are, how they can get to that next step, and then the next step in their career journey.
Thank you. And you guys do great jobs of transitioning for me. So with the responsibility shared with the supervisor, in some situations you have supervisors that aren't comfortable or ready to have these conversations. So both of you as leaders yourself that have had amazing careers, what tips would you give an employee to use frameworks like this to sort of self-guide or move themselves into leadership roles if they're not necessarily being able to get that guidance directly from their first line?
I would say first, volunteer for additional responsibilities and seek leadership training and broadening opportunities. Team lead comes to mind, whether it's unofficial or anything like that. In some instances, it may be collateral duties, but it will establish you as someone who takes the initiative to ensure that the team's projects are complete. And so I'll be honest with you. In some instances, your peers may frown upon that and talk about you. Hey, this person is not my supervisor. Why are they taking the initiative to kind of jump in and make sure all of our stuff is turned in on time? But while they're doing that, while they're talking about you, you're still grinding and you're still working to achieve your goals. And trust me, it will pay off in the end. My experience in the civilian federal government, when we're trying to hire for positions, there's a lot of folks who shy away from supervisory responsibility for whatever reason. So there are plenty opportunities out there, but it begins with you, the employee, to take that initiative to say, hey, I'll volunteer to make sure that this is complete.
I wish I could add to that, but that was spot on.
Thank you both. Yes, I definitely, and I could definitely speak to the part about not worrying about what others are saying and definitely focus on those goals. The only thing I would like to add is also, I think what you said, taking the initiative, but also understanding that that will also mean some sacrifice or balance, because oftentimes seeking out those additional opportunities means you may work a little bit longer some days, or you're in a few more meetings than maybe some of the others, but ultimately that will help you achieve those long-term goals. So thank you both for that. So what advice would you give organizations who are just starting this process? They don't have a leadership continuum. They don't have any competencies to start with. Like, where would you start if you had to start all over?
I think with us is you have to find out, where do you know, what do you know, and then where does that knowledge drop off? I mean, basically what you're asking for is not just a random employee is actually going to develop this program. It's going to be housed somewhere. Typically, it's going to be in some sort of learning and development area. And so from that office, again, if they haven't developed anything, they're going to strategize. What do we know? Where do we want to go? And then present a plan, a strategy to leadership, and to what do they think? The next thing for us, you do want to survey employees. What do they want? Get some feedback from them. Yes, you want to get information from senior leaders, but if you're trying to build leaders, how about we talk to those who are in the roles which will hopefully occupy those roles once they promote into it. And as Michael had said, there's different opportunities. You don't have to necessarily be in a leadership role, but you want to understand, what does your core audience want? Once you have that information set, then you have a strategy, a direction of where you're going to go. And let's face it, we're not just one VA or one Department of Education. We have multiple organizations out there that you can partner with. There's somebody that you can pick up the phone. Hey, I'm trying to do this. You're already there. What are the things that you've done? I love this, the phrase, the case method. Copy and steal everything. Now we don't steal, but the thing of the matter, somebody has already done the work. So let's figure out what they've done and how we can replicate it for our particular area. We shouldn't have to pull out a blank piece of paper and start from scratch. Somebody has a knowledge base. Again, last speaker talked about knowledge transfer. So we should be able to find information that we can partner from several different organizations. That's exactly what Ed did in some of the programs that we did. We went out to HHS, we went out to GSA, we went out to different, of course, my chief learning officer colleagues to find out, what are you doing? And then we figured out, okay, what can we do? And what can we may not be able to do in this particular juncture, but we can modify it for our own success. So I wouldn't look at it as that an individual or an organization is sitting on an island with nobody to talk to. There's too many organizations out there that could be farther along to where you're sitting at, and then provide that information, or at least guidance and assistance, and explain, this is where I started from. Here are the challenges that I experienced. So you don't want to go down that road, but here are some things that you can take forward and make it work for your own organization.
Definitely agree with all of that. Collaboration is key. It is, and it's also important to not reinvent the wheel, to acquire someone who's been successful, acquire those ideas and best practices and apply it to your organization. But my recommendation would be to start small. Not really sure how the culture is in AmeriCorps, but I would start small. Do the crawl, walk, run approach. And like I said earlier, once folks see how that pilot is going, and then you'll more often than not get more participation, more buy-in, and more acceptance to that.
Thank you. And before we get into some more leadership style questions about yourself, I have just a few more about your programs. Well, this one I think relates to both. While each continuum has multiple competencies to enable a holistic agency leader, the goal is to manage organizations. Is there a competency or behavior that resonated with you the most, or that something you really wanted to build in your careers, or that you would encourage others to really focus on as they become leaders? Even though there's multiple ones. I'll give you some time to think.
I would say, in addition to the traditional list, I would say agility and adaptability, but also add resilience. As a leader or assuming a leadership role, life is not fair. I always refer to it fair as a place where they judge pigs and have amusement rides, and you have to be able to shake it off and move on. This is going to take some grit, but also forgiveness, mainly for yourself when you make missteps along your development path, and also humility, and round that out with taking a hard look at yourself and then doing more work on the fundamentals in terms of, hey, I made a little mistake here as a leader. I'm going to learn from that, and I'm going to get better moving forward. And then lastly, gratitude. At the end of the day, at least in my experience, I'm a former 201, and I'll be honest with you, not every day you're going to get thanks for the job that you do from your customers, from your employee base. So you got to have that personal gratitude for yourself, professionally and personally. And then you'll realize things are much easier in life when you kind of live in the present and appreciate how fortunate you are to be as a civilian employee and appreciate the personal things that you have in your life as well.
That was a great response. I definitely want to add to that, especially this forum is talking about leadership. When you are an employee in, let's say, the junior grades, you are provided tasks, activities to be completed by your supervisor. Typically, you're looking at that item and you're going to get it done. It's something very, I'm not going to say it's simple, but it's something pretty straightforward. You're going to get it done. But as you're thinking about moving into ranks, moving into opportunities of leadership, you've got to think a little bit beyond that. And so that's strategic thinking. That's critical thinking. You need to think about, where's this data going? Who's going to see it? What are they going to use it for? Am I providing the type of scope and information that they can answer those types of questions in which the data was originally created? There's a lot of times when you are that fantastic employee, but you're grinding it out, as Michael had said earlier, but you're handing something in without thinking about, where is this going? What's the who, what, when, where, and why that I can add to that? And so when you start thinking about that, what are you doing? You're thinking about the needs of your supervisor and even beyond that, because you're putting yourself in a more strategic and critical phase. So you're completing the item, but you're thinking more of, what does my leader need? Not just completing the task, but you're thinking above that. And so most leaders are thinking about what their supervisor needs, but they're also thinking about what 2 levels above that, maybe even the leader of that organization. When you start putting yourself in that arena, in that scope of mind, then you're putting yourself in the area of a leader because they're thinking beyond. One thing they're absolutely doing, as Michael's saying, you're taking care of your people. You're absolutely doing that. But you're looking upward because you're responding and providing the information, hopefully even before your leader even asks for it. So when you've got that home, you are starting to put yourself in a frame of mind that you're thinking of the needs and the requirements of your supervisor and beyond to make yourself a better leader in the role that you hold.
And Kalada, I would like to add to that, and this is very, very basic, but the lost art of communication in written form and verbal and electronically.
Mm.
Oftentimes, folks will judge you without even knowing you. They will judge you based on a message you sent or a paper you wrote. So I would say if your skill set in that area is not that great, definitely work on that. It's something that you can carry with you, whether you work in the federal government or not. But I would say the lost art of that communication is so important.
No, thank you both. That's very insightful. And the only thing I'll add to the communication piece is, and it goes to something you also said, adaptable and flexible. Every agency and every leader above you will have different styles. And so also having that good foundation as a writer is great, but also knowing that the person above you may not like, they want 2 spaces after a period, or they want everything in, present tense. And so, being able to adapt and pay attention as you're getting corrections and updates from those leaders, it's more often about style than it is about content. And so if you could start to write in their voice and their style, that also provides more trust for you because you're thinking ahead and you're trying to help them resolve those, mitigate any challenges and get through work quickly. As you can imagine, our inboxes are full. And Michael comes from VA. And Michael, I think I have VA beat here with the number of emails I have actively in my inbox right now, but there's so much content back and forth. So the more we can streamline for our leaders, that always helps. So we have a few questions from the audience that I'll also add in now. A question from Erica is, what do you think might be the next big trend in leadership development?
I would say the use of artificial intelligence. We already have micro learning and some other things, but I would say that. I can't really articulate what that will look like in the future, but I would say that's going to be the next thing. And if you can kind of harness that in your organization, you're going to be a leader across the federal space. I'm sad to admit, there are federal agencies who are wearing fine Italian suits, but my organization, we're still in polyester and bell bottoms when it comes to kind of technological advances, but we're getting there.
Let me just say that's the same for us, because when you look at our constituency, American children, if you look at newspapers, you're hearing where high schoolers are going to ChatGPT and having their homework done for them. It is something that obviously we don't run the schools, but the point of the matter is that understanding of the technology and what's it going to do for or with that constituency, which is American children, that's something on our minds. And so how does a leader do that? Our job is to advise and provide assistance to our stakeholders, which is out in the country. How are we going to do that? And from a leader, you've got to understand that type of functionality and how it works itself in all facets of work, whether it's you being a leader, whether it's you delivering a certain deliverable at a certain time. What's it going to mean to us? I mean, right now we're using it simply in certain things. If you just mentioned about, Michael just mentioned about writing. There's a AI app called Grammarly that they just started adding a tagline AI. See, most people didn't know it was an AI resource. What it is, it's an AI resource. So those are the things that we've got to think about specifically using that kind of resource in our everyday life.
Thank you both. And that's what I was thinking of as well. Definitely the use of artificial intelligence. But as you said, Michael, not quite there yet. But and I think most federal agencies, but I think thinking about that going forward, especially I think this generation coming into the workforce, it's going to be very different, and the things they're used to using in a day-to-day and what's available in federal spaces, I think will also be a challenge, because our technology process is not as agile. We have to FedRAMP, and we have to GSA schedule, and check every box, and all these different technological agreements that have to happen before we get new software. And so I think thinking about that as well in terms of retention is key. So the next question I have for you all is from Catherine, and she wants to start with good morning and thank you both for your insights and your time with us. Her question is, what would you say are some of the biggest obstacles for career growth within leadership?
I don't know if you can consider it an obstacle, but there's a lot of work to be done with the crucial conversations between the employee and the first line supervisor. We have a very good tool that we utilize in the VA called the electronic individual development plan. And basically you can go on and kind of map out some things that you aspire to achieve during your performance period, some courses you would like to take. And then it helps with that conversation that you can have with your supervisor. Sadly to say, there are some supervisors who are solely mission focused that they miss that piece in terms of having that crucial conversation. Say, Michael, what are your goals? What would you like to do while you're here? That type of conversation. And if that doesn't occur, then you as an employee, you have the responsibility to kind of push that a little bit. Hey, we need to sit down and have a conversation. There's some courses I'd like to take, whether it's tied to your professional development, whether it's tied to your occupational series. It may be something that you would like, to broaden your horizons on. But it's crucial to have that conversation and start there with the first line supervisor.
Let me continue on that, because we can all see within the last 3 years, we've taken a little bit step back in that connection and engagement between the supervisor and the employee. And this is what definitely Michael is talking about in the services that VA provides. Now we're getting information. Is if you've read the memo from Office of Management and Budget, looking at organizations, looking at organizational performance, organizational health. But one of the things in there, it's focusing on the idea of getting back to some sort of in-person connection with the employees. And this is what Michael was talking about. And so we sort of lost a step to have that close connection with one another, supervisor, employee, because what have we been doing for the last 3 years? We've been in a hybrid virtual environment. And so, yes, we connected, MS Teams or whatever virtual service you are using, we would connect typically on a meeting. We do the meeting, we're out of the meeting. But when do we have a time to chat, follow up, show that empathetic side from the supervisor to the employee? It doesn't have to be that one way, it's from both ways. But we lost the humanness of us. We did the work. We can actually prove, every organization can prove from that time, from 2020 to now, we have successfully provided what the American public wanted us to provide. But where are we of showing those connections between employee to employee, from supervisor to employee? Where's that? And that's some of the challenges and where we're at, to get back into a situation in which we're still and robustly building that connection between us as both professionals and supervisor employee. So we have those type of engagements, so we know one another, so we can have a very personal and professional relationship with one another.
Thank you. I think those are both great points. And one of the things, as someone who enjoys being in a hybrid environment, I do know sometimes, we've had that challenging meeting maybe with a stakeholder. And back when we were in the office, I could walk with that junior staff member and say, it's okay, we're going to connect later, give them that reassurance. But now I just hang up and I go to the next meeting. And sometimes that conversation doesn't happen for days, sometimes, if not even weeks, or it becomes a Teams chat, and they sort of lose that, empathy and understanding that I know that, that was a challenge, but I still support them, because now I'm writing to them 3 hours later when, they probably already called their lunch buddy and vented about it and don't know, what to do next. So definitely, I think thinking through strategies around how to maintain that connectiveness and show the empathy when we're like closing one Team's meeting and going to the other is definitely important. I know for a fact, Michael, your organization is 100% remote. Can you share some strategies you've used with your team being 100% remote for your for HCSC?
Yeah, I will take you back a little bit. I was one of the dinosaurs. I was not a big fan of remote work or working from home, and I'll tell you why. I wanted to keep my personal life and work life separate. So I'll give you 150% while I'm at work, but when I'm at home, my brain switched to home life. Until, prior to COVID, my organization made the decision to save the government money by collapsing our footprint and sending everyone home. And so I had to pivot. It was a challenge for me to kind of learn new ways to connect with my staff in a virtual environment. And the way I kind of did that, we have regular check-ins. And then the regular check-ins and the monthly check-ins, one is strictly professional stuff. And then the other one, I give the employee the opportunity to talk about whatever they want to talk about. Oftentimes you find things out that you never would know, and you can give recommendations on some issues that they may be having. But that has been extremely, extremely effective. But it was, I will be honest, it was a leadership challenge for me to kind of pivot to that. I like the face-to-face deal. You can read facial expressions better. You can tell whether you're communicating effectively or whether the person is really not agreeing with what you're saying. And it's, in my opinion, it's from a leadership perspective, it adds an element that you kind of lose in the virtual environment. So I had to pivot. I had to change, and it has been working so far in the last 3 years.
I've got to admit that also. I was not a fan of the remote work. It wasn't the fact of I wanted to split my time between thinking about work and thinking about home, but I just never thought of bringing those two together, which I would be effective, not only leading the mission, but also leading my team. And I do some of the things that Michael does. I have a one-on-one with my team members every week. We have a in-person activity once a month. We try to go out somewhere, of course, but I'm in the Washington, D.C. area, so we try to go somewhere. It still is it's a working meeting, but we're getting out of the building. And we've done the same. Ed has done the same thing. That it has collapsed some of the workspaces and buildings in which we have. So I do have a number of team members that are coming in to the building in different spaces, but we do have that opportunity for us to come together at one time. And what makes it very interesting for us is that I was talking to you earlier about bargaining unit and non-bargaining unit. So I'm a 201 by trade. So all of us is about 88. I don't run all 8. I'm talking about the Office of Human Resources, about 88 employees. So I've got employees in learning and development. All those employees, except for one, is non-bargaining unit. And so right now, based on the collective bargaining agreement, we're not changing any schedules of employees. So when we started to run this monthly meeting, we couldn't change their schedule. So we make sure wherever we go to, we've got a connection to them so they can be a part of the activity. Whether it's simple as bringing a laptop, bringing a phone, wherever we're at, they see and can interact with us, of course, through the wonders of technology, that they can be a part of that activity. Even to the point of when we do go out, a lot of times I'm buying lunch for everyone. Pick up the phone. What do we have? DoorDash. It's going to come right to you. We're going to DoorDash your meal. We have that collective meal together so this person doesn't feel left out.
Yeah, Kalada, I'd like to add as well. I had to realize some things that, that really didn't cross my mind. One was, there are some people, I have a brother like that. He gets his energy, he's an extrovert. So he gets his energy from being around people constantly. And so that kind of gets his battery full, as opposed to like an extrovert would be fine just working home alone. And we had a few employees that really struggled with that. And I had to kind of like take a step back and kind of really assess what was going on with that, because from the surface you would say, hey, you live in California, you're working from home, you don't have a brick and mortar to go into, you have your program or service that you're happy managing. What is the problem? You never have to come to the National Capital Region and deal with all the traffic and everything. What is the issue? And I would say leaders, supervisors will have to be aware of some of those little things like that could prop up where someone is kind of suffering in silence and they really don't want to kind of share what they're feeling about being away from their team members in isolation.
Thank you. That's a great point. I know there's been some data or research around Gen Z wanting to be in the workplace because of that same reason. They want that connectiveness and they want to have the conversations. And so I think that'll be a challenge because there are more of them in the workplace. And I think many of us have already done our time in the brick and mortar for 20 years and trying to figure out how to balance that, supporting, this new generation of workers, but also respecting, like what we need and what we feel like we've earned in a way. I think it's going to be an interesting dynamic over the next, 5 to 10 years with the hybrid model. Yes. So I have a question from Kashinte. What are some of the most important lessons you've learned in your leadership journey, including lessons you might not have expected to learn?
I will say, as Michael, I served in the Air Force, and I took a lot of those opportunities and challenges into this new role. And one thing throughout that career and this one, absolutely be transparent. And when you have information that is not positive, you tell leadership immediately. Don't color it, don't change it. Here's what it is. But if you can, provide some recommendations, some ideas of solution. It's one thing to say, this is bad, but then we can say, but here's some options that we can consider. It puts you in a light that you're thinking about the challenge, but you're also looking at ways that we can not necessarily work around it, but try to work through it. So I want that leader to understand not everything's going to be, rosy every time. We're going to have some issues and challenges that we need to work through. And you're going to know from me, I'm going to tell you the transparent truth, but I'm also going to come up with some ideas and solutions that, one, will fix this issue immediately, and two, hopefully will mitigate this for the future.
I would say for me, it was the realization long time ago that it's not about you, Michael. It's about the employees and folks that you can help along the way. Once I let that go, it was very actually liberating to kind of say, okay, not worried about the awards or promotion or those things that used to be important to me, but focusing on others and making sure the subordinates are squared away to do what they need to do and achieve their goals and opportunities. So at my current position now, that's really my whole focus in life. Yeah, I do have a job and I'm doing that job, but it's all about, let me see what I can do to help someone in their career journey.
Thank you both. I have one last question. I'm going to ask you all to think. We actually have several of our interns. AmeriCorps has a summer internship program, and so we have 5 interns or so on the phone. And thinking back to your very first job, whether it's your first government job, what is one thing you wish you had known or someone had tapped you on the shoulder to tell you that you would like to share with our interns here today?
I'll start it off. I think for me is to absolutely understand the organization that you're in. You're there to provide service, you're there to provide resource, but you have to understand what is the business that the business is in. Who is the stakeholder? What does success look like, and how can you provide to that success? Because even though you may be there for a short time, your work matters. So what is that work? Ask questions. There's no, as we all know, there's no such thing as a dumb question. But if you're there for a short time, you're not there for 3 years, you're there for 6, 7 months, you don't have the time to build up that network. And so ask a lot of questions for awareness and understanding. And again, as I said, understand the business that the business is in. So you can sit back, talk to your supervisor at the time, and then they can work with you for your understanding to see, where do I fit based on the organizational goal? So my work, I know that my work matters.
I come from a large family. I'm the middle, number 5 of 10 kids, and a preacher's kid, mind you. So I clearly understood early on, keep your head down, work hard, and keep your mouth shut. But to Viking's point, for you as a new intern, I would say something that I wish I had known, in addition to understanding the organization, understanding the organizational culture. So I'll revert back to my DoD days. There's a culture in the Pentagon that everyone adheres to. It's kind of an unwritten thing that if there is something to be done, everyone focuses on that mission to get it done. It's kind of a no-fail environment. And so as an intern, regardless of what organization you're going in addition to understanding, what are we selling? What are our goals? What are our mission? What are we here for? You still have to understand the culture, and that'll make it a little easier for you, whether it fits what you're trying to do and you decide to pursue other opportunities, or you say, yeah, I can adjust to this, I can do that.
Yeah. Thank you both so much for sharing. One, about your overall programs and how they've been successful in transforming your organizations. succession planning, leadership development, and where you see your organization going. And then I'm also grateful for you all sharing your nuggets of wisdom of, developing as leaders and sharing that information with those of us on the call. This has been invaluable. Michael, great to see you again, and Viking, pleasure meeting you for the first time on the phone call here. But thank you all so much for your partnership. And we'll go on a very long break. Our next session is at 11:45. So we're going to go on break now, but look forward to seeing those of you joining us for the very last session on diversity, equity, and inclusion, led by Vita from ODIA. But again, thank you both so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Good to see you, Claudia.
Take care.
All right, Viking, take care.
Take care, Michael.
Good morning, everyone. Again, welcome back. So our next speaker and last presentation of the day will be Vita Hurst, and she will be speaking to us about incorporating DEIA in culture. Vita is the DIA program manager in the Education, Culture, and Belonging branch in the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility here at AmeriCorps. Vita joined us very recently from the Office of Management and Budget in the Executive Office of the President, where she was the DIA program manager responsible for the development and implementation of OMB's DIA strategic plan. Vita also served as the acting human capital director for OMB and as the human capital specialist managing the employee relations and performance management portfolios. Prior to OMB, Vita spent 17 years in various equal employment opportunity, diversity program management, and attorney advisor roles at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Vita is a native of Jamaica, West Indies, and Vita grew up in the Brooklyn, New York area and currently resides in Odenton, Maryland. She is an alumnus of John Jay College City, University of New York, earning both her BA and MA in criminal justice. Vita also received her JD from the Thomas M. Cooley School of Law at Western Michigan University. Vita is a passionate soccer and basketball mom to a very active teenager. Vita, I'm excited to have you with us here today, so I will turn it over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kalada. I am excited to be here to represent the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility on behalf of Nate Benjamin, our Chief Diversity Officer here at AmeriCorps. I also want to thank the Human Capital Leadership Team for providing this opportunity to partner and celebrate the important work that you all do for our workforce. This is hard and rewarding work. It takes a particular talent and skill to do it well, and I want you to know that your efforts are recognized and appreciated. I have benefited from the excellent training that you all provided as a part of the new employee onboarding, and I plug it whenever I can. In my 23 years of federal service, it is the first time that I've actually had new employee training, and I've heard about great programs, and I can now personally say that I've experienced it. So I want to thank you for that. We also have other great opportunities where I've had an opportunity to partner, Nate has had an opportunity to partner in collaborating on the DEIA content that's being offered to the workforce, the rollout of the internship program. Whoop, whoop, we have 2 interns. The workforce planning team's mission critical occupation analysis, the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey, performance management awards, and just all the other programming efforts that are underway. You do a tremendous amount of work, so I just want to thank you for that. So my pronouns are she, her, hers, and as you can see, I'm a Black female with Black hair and brown eyes, and I'm wearing a black and white shirt. And I am passionate about people and helping them lead their best lives and doing the things to help make the world around us a better place. And I'm just growing up in New York with my parents. It was such a great experience for me because I was, when folks that are adopted, they say that they're special because they were chosen. And I really feel that way because my parents went all the way across the world, if you will, to find me and adopt me. And they taught me the power of love, and really instilled in me just the importance of value and belonging, which is so integral to the DEIA space. They also taught me the importance of just working hard and valuing others and being valued and building connections. And that's really integral to the work that you do in the human capital space and that we do in the DEIA space as well. So there's really no better way to be a public servant in the federal service than doing this work and improving lives and strengthening communities, which really ties in at the heart of AmeriCorps' strategic mission. And with that, I would like to go to the next slide and just kind of tell you a little bit about the DEIA journey. And here, what I want to start off by saying here is everyone has a story, as you see on the slide. And what this made me think of is a quote from Maya Angelou that says, "People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you make them feel." And that ties in so much with the work that we do in the DEIA and human capital space, because we're the first touch that individual, be it an applicant that then turns into a candidate and on board and through the employment life cycle. What we do makes a difference in that space. And it's so important that we connect that everyone has value, from the CEO suite down to the management, professional and support staff, early talent pipeline with our interns. When we show staff that we appreciate and respect and value them, it gives them the space to do their best work. And so it's just so critically important that we listen and learn their stories and use that to engage them. And with that, I want to go to the next slide, where I want to start out with some foundational definitions about DEIA. So it is, because this is critical to have that fair and consistent definition and understanding of what the words mean. And to ensure that this is properly executed, I want to share with you how the White House has done so through the executive order, which in 2021, President Biden signed his first executive order, which is Executive Order 13985, Advancing Racial Equity and Support for Underserved Communities through the federal government. And in June of 2021, he issued Executive Order 14035, which focuses on DEIA in the federal workforce. And in the spirit of today's conversation, we're going to be spending more time here. So I'm not going to read from the slide on the screen, but I do want to highlight some key points there, in that unlike civil rights and employment, with civil rights and employment, they're codified in the law through the Civil Rights Act of 1964, but DEIA, it's executed through executive order and by the passion of the people in the space. So even still, it is the right thing to do, and it impacts our mission and our bottom line. So when we talk about diversity, the government must be able to hire and promote the nation's best talent and build a diverse and representative workforce through an open and fair process consistent with merit principles. And this is where you do some of your key work there. So, when you're doing that work, you're working with the hiring managers to appropriately identify talent. You're working with them to identify multiple means to announce vacancies, working with them. I talked about the working group there in the mission critical occupation. So identifying the pipeline, what are the key positions for the agency, working to eliminate bias and addressing potential barriers and accessing job opportunities. So just an important work there in bringing in and that diversity in the workspace. Equity is also key because it refers to our infrastructure policies and practices, and this allows individuals to access all available resources and opportunities to be successful. And we really need to focus on how we can mitigate against potential barriers to professional development and promotion, and take steps to ensure fair outcomes and access to services. When we talk about inclusion, we're looking at us as an agency at AmeriCorps being a model employer where all employees, including employees from underserved communities, are treated fairly and thrive in an inclusive work environment. And I want to touch briefly on accessibility. So under Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act, this requires that information and communication technology must also be accessible for people with disabilities. And here the federal government must consistently design, construct, and develop and maintain facilities, technologies, programs, and services so that all people, including people with disabilities, can fully and independently use them. And another point that I want to make here is that when we're talking about accommodations and modifications, we want to ensure equal access for the participation for people with disabilities, and looking at eliminating physical and attitudinal barriers to equitable opportunities, and ensuring that commitment that we can really, that individuals with disabilities can independently access every outward facing and internal activity or the electronic space, and the pursuit of best practices such as universal design. And just in terms of getting ready for this presentation, one of the things that I looked up is just what are the stats on individuals with disabilities in America and around the world. And I had no idea it was this many. There are 61 million Americans with disabilities and 1 billion people worldwide. So a significant population, and really it speaks to the importance of just what we talked about, just critically important to make sure that we are making space that they have access and that they can meaningfully connect and contribute and do their best work. Next slide. So what we're going to be talking about next is just DEIA being measurable. And so this is work that's been underway for some time. And this started back in the early part of around 2012, 2013, with the development of the new inclusion quotient, which focused on the 5 habits of inclusion, which look at creating a workforce that's fair, open, cooperative, and supportive and empowering. And that evolved over time as OPM did some research and refined the metrics there. They came up with some refined criteria that were released as a part of the 2022 FEVS, and we received those results earlier this year. But really what we're looking at there is, are we treating employees equitable? Does management support diversity in all ways? Does management encourage communication and collaboration? Are supervisors supportive, often valuing and their employees? And are they really empowering employees and supporting them in doing their best work? And based on the FEVS scoring, if you will, or ratings that came out in FY22, they serve as a benchmark, if you will. And with that benchmark, we're doing okay. There's more work to be done. So we ranked 18 out of 29 small agencies. Our strongest category there was in the inclusion category. We scored a 83, and we ranked as high as 18 out of the 29 small agencies. We have a fair amount of work to do in the equity space, where our ranking there is 69%. So we're averaging in the high 70s. So we have a good baseline to foundationally ground us as we continue the work that we're doing in the diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility space, and as we partner with you, our human capital partners. Next slide. And so what I also wanted to show you here is just kind of the DEIA maturity model. So just linking to the benchmark that I mentioned before, we're really looking at where are we in our DEIA journey. And so in the first level, what agencies are looking at in this category are typically they have an EEO compliance focus. So they will usually have an EEO program, of course, because that's required by regulation. Oftentimes, though, those programs can be siloed and they may not have a lot of funding or resources. When you progress to level 2, those programs, they're more in-depth, there are more DEIA efforts underway, and they're starting to yield better results. And here you may have better integration with EEO and HR. And then in terms of when you get to level 3, that's where you really have deep integration and synthesis, where there's really significant organizational buy-in and connection to what DEIA is. There's an understanding of the definition. There's broad partnership and collaboration between programs. Here you are really, there's that tie into the mission, vision, and values, and the work is fully resourced and led at the highest level of the agencies. So just in terms of where we are at AmeriCorps, I would say that we are somewhere between level 2 and level 3. I'm proud to share that it is championed at the highest level of the organization. Last year, we had Nate was named our Chief Diversity Officer. So there's definitely significant leadership and direction there. We have a DEIA strategic plan and strategic roadmap that I'm going to be sharing more with you about. In terms of the staffing and resources, that is something that we're working and building out, but there is definitely a passion and excitement and engagement in the space in terms of this work and a lot of the great things that we're going to be doing. So I'm going to have to jump because we have a lot of things. Next slide. Next. Yeah, so some of the things that we have to think about in this space is we have to celebrate our people. We have to really just kind of look at some of the challenges that we are experiencing, how we work through some of the complexities in the space, and then how we can really move to driving change. Next slide. So when we're looking at celebrating, we're really just looking at just being able to recognize that the foundational space that we're operating in, and how we go about making change and progress. And we're really looking at identifying agents in the organization that can help us celebrate our employees, just really kind of help us as we move into the next slide, into identifying some of the challenges that may be there in the DEIA space that really are impacting organizational success. And part of that, in terms, you hear the term, what gets measured gets done. So it's really important there that we establish some of the frameworks that I'll be getting into a couple of slides there, in terms of just really looking at how we drive progress forward, just really looking at the roles and responsibilities for our teams and staff, and just really looking at what are the needs of employees and when we're talking about DEIA expectations. So what does it take for that employee to feel valued, that they have a safe space to connect and do their best work? And then in terms of, next slide, moving to the complexities, especially when you're looking to stand up a DEIA program. A lot of this work has already been done for us in this space, but it's just really speaking about why DEIA is important in the workplace and legitimizing it. Just in some of the early years coming into like in the first iteration, if you will, of DEIA in government in the early to mid 2000s, there was the question of why do we need this? What is the purpose? Just even establishing goals, there were some real challenges there, and just the messaging behind it. Because again, what gets measured gets done, and a big part of getting things done is being able to communicate why the work is important and providing appropriate support and resources to get that work done, which then leads to the next slide where we're able to drive change and meaningful results. So we're able to get the right stakeholders to the table. We're able to really look at how to support the program and infrastructure, organize and align it to organizational success metrics, and really get a strategy that is going to help us drive change. And so I want to now transition to the next slide, our DEIA journey. And really it starts back in 2020 in this current iteration, if you will, in that there was a DEI initiative that was started by AmeriCorps employees who were really concerned about what was happening with George Floyd. And really they looked at that. So during that civil unrest, the agency was bold and brave to say that what was continuing in terms of race relations was not right, and that we needed to have a response. And to that end, our employees set up a DEI initiative, which consisted of launching employee-driven focus groups and trainings with the change of administration. And it just really supported the development of the agency's equity action and DEI strategic plans. And this lens was necessary to support establishing our Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility, and appointing the first Chief Diversity Officer. So next slide. So, and then one of the first things that Nate did, and just kind of tying back into just the importance of having a framework and a foundation there, Nate found it critically important to stand up a DEIA strategic roadmap to support the equity action and DEIA strategic plans. And so to best understand how human capital can support DEIA efforts, it's best for us to provide you with a snapshot of where we're coming from, where we are, and how you can, with your support, we can really get to our desired end state. So for the next few minutes, would you just buckle down, and as I take you down the road of progress of our next steps and where we're going. So just to provide the framing in response to okay, so just in terms of where we are now, so it's not an easy task. And so we started out with the Office of Civil Rights Programming. That office got merged with the new Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And so to ensure that the office was foundationally prepared to sustain success and longevity, it was critically important to ensure that the agency's strategic plan on Goal 5 to make AmeriCorps the best and most equitable place in government cascaded down. And so we linked that to Goal 5.2, which charges our office to strengthen the foundation of DEIA in the workplace. And so we do that by getting at the what, the where, and the how. So the what ties into mission, which is to advance, integrate, and sustain equity, inclusion, and accessibility across DEIA. And the where looks to the vision, which is strengthening lives and leading the way in strategic diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. And our values focus on flexibility, which ties into flexibility, accountability, and shared responsibility, transparency, and ingenuity. Next slide. So once we identified the foundation, our office developed the strategic roadmap, and this roadmap outlines our goals and serves as our blueprint for the work that we will do over the next 4 years. And so in that space, our initiatives will change from year to year. And so what we have here with this roadmap, it doesn't capture the day-to-day, but just kind of the high level. It illustrates the work that will help shape and drive the work of the organization for current and future success. And so while Rome was not built in a day, neither is the execution of every initiative. And so, but what we can promise is that we are taking a strategic approach to our work and have instituted processes to ensure the successful completion of at least 85% of our goals. So next slide. So to give you a high level overview, we call goal 1 our education goal. This is our education priority. Goal 2 is our external equity goal. Goal 3 focuses on enforcement. Goal 4 focuses on internal inclusion. And goal 5, this is a personal goal for Nate. And that is where he has personally charged himself with that responsibility to ensure that our team is diverse, it's high performing and engaged, because without this, we are not set up for success to support the agency. So for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through all of the information listed on the slide, but I do want to share that what the goals that we've set for the internal agency under goal 4 have all been met. And I also want to highlight that under goal 1, strategic initiative 4, develop and execute ODIA's learning and development strategy. This has also been completed and will be referenced for context within the next few slides. And I also want to share that, bring your attention to goal 2, because as you may notice that strategic initiatives 2.1 through 2.4, the messaging there remains the same. And it was identified separately by all programs across the agency. And so it really showed that there was a need to identify and invest in foundational DEIA education for internal and external stakeholders. So I just kind of want to go through what some of those top line items were. Next slide. And I just want to start by talking about equity. So the best way that we can plant ourselves in the conversation is a charge from the AmeriCorps Equity Action Plan. So the top line items here, as you see on the screen, advancing civil rights, recruiting a diverse corps, supporting tribal communities, addressing limited language proficiencies, and increasing equity in our procurement. So I want to start by talking about training. So under advancing civil rights, here we've provided training for grantees and sponsors, especially those with limited resources, on how to create a more inclusive and accessible service environment, which prevents complaints and ensures civil rights laws are being followed. So developing technical assistance resources and grantees are just really an important part of the work that we're doing in this space. In terms of staffing, we've added staff to the Civil Rights Office to provide the training needed and to process complaints more quickly. And we're also looking at adding a disability and accessibility program manager to support programs, members, volunteers, and grantees. And we're looking to, we're projecting 100% staffing for the office by July of 2023. So we're really excited about that. In terms of regulations, the civil rights requirement to monitor, guide, and publish agency regulations. This is something that we have underway and is projected for FY24. And in terms of program benefits, we are looking at improving benefit communications and identifying opportunities to support member professional development. In terms of a recruitment support here, we're looking at establishing an AmeriCorps recruitment team, or the overall agency goal, and developing intentional strategies to improve diversity through outreach and improve ease of access. And in this space, the agency has staffed the recruitment team 100% of the staffing levels for FY23. And ODA is continually partnering with offices to support grantees and sponsors regarding their concerns, challenges, and opportunities. There's a lot of work that's been going on in partnering with Native communities, looking at reducing barriers to service. And so here to close the gaps, AmeriCorps has hired a full-time staff to support Native American affairs across the agency and prioritize hiring a strategic advisor. They've also done introduced cultural competency trainings, and that's been attended by over 25% of the AmeriCorps staff. The training was amazing. And then in June, I believe this was actually last week, they hosted a tribal grantee convening in Las Vegas as an because this was really essential to reducing the barriers to funding and retention. So really bringing them together, to the tribal communities together to connect and share best practices was really important. There's also work that's underway with addressing limited English proficiency. We actually developed and submitted our language access plan for review to the Department of Justice this past May, so an important first step there. And additional work is being done by the procurement office in terms of making sure that we are promoting and utilizing the set-aside companies that have 8A recognition by the SBA. So just looking at connecting with those communities that are underserved in government contracts and providing more space and support in that space. So next slide, I'd like to share with you some of what's been accomplished in the past, in the last year. As you see, we've been doing a lot. We've established the learning and development strategy, and we're implementing against that. We've established the DEI Council, special observance plan, community spaces that's being held on a monthly basis, a DEIA dashboard for DEIA priorities. We've also made sure to implement training plans aligned to performance plan to support competency gap closure, and developing an engagement strategy to enhance ODIA employee engagement and sustainability. Next slide. And so just some of the other things that we've been able to complete, we're procured an electronic tracking system to support modernization of our complaint tracking in the office. We have a contract for Title IX and Title VII, and for Title IX and Title 12. We've delegated AmeriCorps EEO authority for DEIA and civil rights. We're doing a lot of work with the White House initiatives for HBCUs, AA and HPI, and the Latino Economic Summit. And we've also been asked to present information on our DEIA programming here, as we've been identified as a model agency for best practices by the Chief Diversity Officer Council. So next slide. So there's a lot of work that we've been doing in the space. And in terms of what's on the horizon, we are working on a partnership with PHA for a health equity contract, which we're looking to award hopefully by the end of this year, before the end of this last quarter, where we're looking to develop educational content in the DEIA space that will be available to the AmeriCorps workforce, to our members and grantees. We're looking to do a high school tour partnering with NCCC. We're looking at just building out civil rights engagement and training to our members, grantees, and volunteers. We're working on a series of podcasts linked to DEIA that will be released in the next quarter. And we are planning a DEIA virtual summit for the entire workforce that we're targeting for the fourth quarter. We're continuing with our strategic planning and also on a end of year DEIA report that will tie into all the great work that's been happening throughout the past year. Next slide. So mindful of time, we're at 12:20. I just wanted to just kind of touch on the last few slides very quickly. So really as you will see in the slide, you see the image of representation matters. And one of the things that I want to tie in here is it's important that, as I said at the beginning, it's important that we listen and connect and really bring value to each person that we connect with in the space. Because when people feel heard, they feel valued, and that's when they are contributing and really doing their best work. And if people not just have a seat at the table, but actually are able to use their voice, they can bring insight, they can bring perspective, and they can bring change. And with change, it brings progress. And with that, there's so much more that I could say, but I just want to just kind of hop to the last slide, which says that 76% of employees and job seekers report that diversity is important when they're considering job offers. 89% of people want their companies to be inclusive of individuals with intellectual disabilities, and racially and ethnically diverse companies have a 36% higher likelihood of financially outperforming less diverse companies. So just really in achieving our mission, the more diverse we are, the more connected we are, the more people we can reach, and the more we can really tie back to our mission of strengthening communities and changing lives. So I really thank you for the opportunity to connect and engage in the space and to continue to partner in the great work that you all do in the human capital space. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Vida. Are there any questions that you all have from the chat? And as always, you could raise your hand and come off mute. Okay. So I will start with the first question then, Vida, today. So given the journey that ODEA has been on since last summer, what do you think has been the biggest challenge that you all have faced thus far?
So the biggest challenging is, I would say, meeting the need of our community in terms of the education space. So what we saw in the agency equity strategic plan was there was a need across the workforce, members and grantees, that we need to know more, we need to have a better understanding about DEIA. And so part of that was looking at how do we meet that metric when we didn't necessarily have a body, we didn't have the learning and development strategy in place. We didn't have content that we as an office were able to develop and deliver in meeting those initial needs. So that was a challenge. And so how we met that challenge is we didn't have staffing to resource to meet all of these challenges. So what we did there is we reached out and we got detailees, and one of our detailees from VA, Tiffany Scott, she helped us develop our learning strategy, which really provided a foundational baseline for us to identify the frame. What did we need to, how would we develop good content, great content, and how would we go about delivering it? And with that foundation in place, we developed a DEIA Journey Foundational course. So it's about 6 hours of content that we use to start delivering DEIA content. And so again, because of a resource issue, we have to be strategic about how we can deliver the content, but we have started deploying it at, we did it at the AmeriCorps Seniors Convening, and we're looking for other strategic opportunities to deliver that education content.
Thank you so much. I don't see any additional questions in the chat. So Vida, I want to thank you so much for your time today and sharing with us, DEIA's journey thus far. And at the interest of time, I will proceed with wrapping up today's session, starting, of course, with thanking you, Vida, and all of the other speakers we had today. So of course, I hope everyone enjoyed and really appreciated all of the information that was provided, starting, earlier today with Jennifer, our panel with Viking and Michael, and then Vida wrapping us up for today. This is just one step in supporting and creating partnerships internal, with AmeriCorps. And I would say ODEA and OHC have a really great partnership already, and we're looking for more ways to partner and collaborate on a regular basis. So this is our first annual summit, and we hope that, this will not be the first and last. So we look forward to gaining more traction and doing this again soon, and also, attending and providing information to your future events and summits as well. I think over the last 2 days and today, we continue to see the dedication and innovation that exists across the federal government. And as I mentioned on day one, that's often a misnomer that the government isn't innovative and we aren't, competing with private sector to retain and develop talent. But I think just from the snapshot of speakers we've heard from, we are. And, there's over 30 some government agencies, I think closer to 50 actually. So just think about all of the agencies we didn't hear from, and there's so much great work to leverage. As a part of our AmeriCorps strategic plan, we would like to, and the OHC strategic plan, we want to participate again in these opportunities. And as Viking said, it gives us an opportunity to practice the CASE method, which is copy and steal everything, which I loved. I always tell people that we're not alone, and that many of the activities we're doing in human capital have been done or there's resources available that we can leverage for our talent management journeys. So I'd like to recap a bit of what was discussed today. Jennifer Breeden from OPM provided us with an overview of succession planning strategies. Succession planning hasn't been something we've implemented yet at AmeriCorps, but what she provided today was a great framework for succession planning, along with other initiatives, such as our development of a leadership framework and workforce planning here. There was a continued theme from Jennifer and many others today of not relying solely on HR to transform the organizations, but partnering with supervisors and leaders to have them as owners in the process. And the one thing Jennifer highlighted for us that is important is succession planning is not pre-selection. It's not absolute or static, and it's not equal treatment in that the opportunities are given to those that are interested, and it's not replacement planning. Jennifer thankfully provided us with tools and will follow up with more information for us to assess our workforce and different models, including the 9-box. Jennifer also highlighted the importance of knowledge management. It's very important that as our leaders grow and develop, that we take the time out to document our processes, our methodologies, our challenges, and lessons learned. Succession planning, if done properly, is extending opportunities to as many people as possible. Following up behind Jennifer and linking very closely to succession planning was Viking White and Michael Bird speaking to their leadership development continuums and frameworks, which is an important part of a succession planning strategy if you're focusing on leadership development. Both Michael and Viking spoke to the importance of developing leaders at all levels. And they also continue that consistent message around having ownership shared with the leaders and having leaders be more involved with these human capital initiatives. Michael also reminded us that our employees are our greatest assets, and fostering a culture of learning was important to the success of an organization. Towards the end of the presentation, Michael and Viking shared some nuggets of wisdom, which I hope all of you found valuable in how to be successful in your leadership journeys. And some of those nuggets include understanding the business that you're in, understanding the culture of the organization, asking good questions, and taking initiative to develop as a leader and to be recognized as a high performer. And last but not least, Vida shared with us what DEIA is and differentiated from the civil rights work that is also done within our ODEA organization. DEIA is in fact measurable, and Vida spoke to how AmeriCorps is monitoring and looking at our success using the FEVS or FEVS. We also learned that there is a maturity model that really focuses on how we can determine where we are as an organization and look for opportunities for improvement, which include integration, resource management, and strategic alignment. I was excited to hear that AmeriCorps has made such progress and our maturity level is close to 2 or 3, and excited about the accomplishments to date. As a Black woman, I am very excited and appreciative that AmeriCorps is looking for ways to hear us and be a partner with us as leaders in the organization. So I think some themes we heard over the last 2 days were, again, having leadership ownership. Also, we talked about many different journeys, which started with NASA's journey to the better yesterday. We talked about leadership journeys and the journey that ODEA took today. So I'm also very excited for our interns that were here today, because hearing from others and being able to leverage the best practices was critical to my professional journey. And so I hope all of you heard at least one thing over the last 2 days that piqued your curiosity or motivated you to action. So again, thank you to everyone who was in attendance. I'm very inspired and looking forward to what we create from today. And thank you again for all of our presenters and all of you who gave time over the last 2 days to participate. Thank you so much to Stacy Michaels. If it was not for her, this event would not have happened. But if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to her, smichaels@cns.gov. The PowerPoint and audio will be available in the next few days. We'll send something out to all guests. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of day.